Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know a lot of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we start, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and just relax. The swimming pool after hours. I was never really the athletic type in high school, but my counselor said I needed one more PE credit to graduate. The only class that fit my schedule was beginning swimming, which met at 7 in the morning before regular classes started. I know, 7 in the morning sounds terrible, but it was actually better than having to take advanced basketball or something where everyone would see how uncoordinated I was. Plus, I figured swimming would be easy enough since I already knew how to swim from summers at the lake with my family. The first day of class in early September was rough though, getting up at 6 to make it to school on time. The pool was in a separate building behind the main school, this old structure from the 1960s that they kept talking about renovating but never did. Walking in there that first morning was like walking into a cave, all echoey and damp with that chlorine smell that burns your nose. There were only about 12 of us in the class, mostly freshmen and sophomores, and then me, the only senior taking beginning swimming. Our teacher was Coach Randall, this older guy who looked like he'd been teaching swimming since the pool was built. He had this way of talking where everything sounded like a military command, even when he was just telling us to get our towels. The first few weeks were pretty normal, just basic stuff like floating and different strokes. I was actually better than most of the freshmen, which made me feel less embarrassed about being there. But then something weird happened in the third week of class. I'd forgotten my goggles in the locker room after class and didn't realize it until lunch, so I went back to get them during my free period. The pool building was supposed to be locked when classes weren't in session, but the door was propped open with a wooden wedge. I figured maintenance was working on something and went in to grab my goggles real quick. The locker room was empty and dark, but I knew where the light switch was from changing every morning. My goggles were right where I'd left them on the bench, and I was about to leave when I heard something from the pool area. It sounded like splashing, like someone was swimming, which was weird because there weren't any classes scheduled during lunch periods. I walked over to the door that connected the locker room to the pool and pushed it open just a crack to look through. The pool lights were on, making the water glow this eerie blue-green color, and there was definitely someone in the water, but something about the way they were moving wasn't right. They weren't swimming exactly, more like floating just under the surface and occasionally thrashing around. I opened the door a little wider to get a better look, and that's when I saw their face. It was a kid about my age, but his skin was this pale gray color, and his eyes were wide open even though he was underwater. He wasn't holding his breath or anything, just staring up at the ceiling through the water while his body moved in these weird, jerky motions. I must have made some kind of noise because suddenly his head snapped toward me, still underwater, and he smiled. Not a normal smile, but way too wide, like his mouth was stretching further than it should be able to. I ran out of there so fast I didn't even close the doors behind me. When I told my friends about it at lunch, they laughed and said I was seeing things, that the chlorine fumes had gotten to me or something. But I knew what I saw wasn't normal. The next morning at swimming class, I asked Coach Randall if anyone else used the pool during the day. He gave me this long look and said no. The pool was off-limits when classes weren't in session for insurance reasons. Then he asked why I wanted to know. I made up something about thinking I'd left my goggles by the pool and wanting to come back for them. He said if I ever needed to get something I'd forgotten, I should ask him first and he'd unlock the building for me. The way he said it sounded more like a warning than helpful advice. For the next couple of weeks, everything was normal during class, but I started noticing things I hadn't before, like how Coach Randall never actually got in the water with us, not even to demonstrate techniques. He always stayed on the deck, fully dressed in khakis and a polo shirt. and there were these dark stains on the bottom of the deep end that looked like rust, but seemed to move sometimes when I was underwater. Then there was this freshman kid named Tyler who was struggling with the class. He was scared of putting his face in the water and could barely float without panicking. Coach Randall seemed to pay special attention to him, not in a helpful way, but almost like he was marking him for something. One morning in October, Tyler didn't show up for class. Coach Randall said he'd dropped the class, decided swimming wasn't for him. But that seemed weird because we were already halfway through the semester, and dropping now would mean Tyler wouldn't get any credit. Plus, I'd seen Tyler in the hallway the day before, and he hadn't mentioned anything about quitting. I asked around and found out Tyler hadn't been in any of his other classes either. His parents had called the school saying he was sick, but when I talked to his friend Mark, he said Tyler's parents had been calling his phone non-stop because Tyler hadn't come home the night before. That's when I decided to go back to the pool building after school to look around. I know it sounds stupid, but something felt really wrong about the whole situation. This time I made sure to go when there were still people around, right after final period when the parking lot was full of students leaving. The door was locked this time, but I'd noticed during morning classes that one of the windows in the girls' locker room didn't latch properly. I was able to push it open from the outside and climb through. The locker room was dark and empty, but I could hear something coming from the pool area. It sounded like voices, but muffled and distorted like they were coming from underwater. I crept over to the door and looked through the small window. The pool was full of people, not swimming, just standing in the water up to their necks, completely still, all facing the same direction toward the deep end. There must have been 20 or 30 of them, all different ages, some in regular clothes, some in old-fashioned swimming suits. And at the front of them, standing on the diving board, was Coach Randall. He was talking, but I couldn't make out the words. They sounded garbled and wrong. Then I saw Tyler among the group in the pool. He was in the shallow end with the others, that same grey tint to his skin that I'd seen on the kid from before, his eyes wide open and unblinking. Coach Randall raised his arms, and all the people in the pool suddenly went under at the same time, like they were being pulled down. The water went completely still for a moment, then they all came back up in perfect unison. But when they surfaced, they looked different. More solid somehow, more real, while Tyler looked more faded, more like the others. I must have gasped or something because Coach Randall's head snapped toward the door. Even from across the pool area, I could see his eyes weren't normal. They were completely black, no whites at all. He smiled that same too-wide smile I'd seen on the kid in the pool before. I ran again, but this time I heard the door slam open behind me and footsteps following. Not running footsteps but walking, steady and patient like they knew I couldn't get away. I made it out the window and ran to my car, driving home way over the speed limit. That night I tried to tell my parents, but they didn't believe me. They said I was stressed about college applications and seeing things. My dad even offered to call the school and get me transferred out of swimming class if it was bothering me that much. But the next morning, when I didn't show up for swimming, Coach Randall came to find me. He pulled me out of my first period English class, saying he needed to discuss my absence. We walked down the empty hallway, and he was completely silent until we were alone. Then he told me I had two choices. I could come back to swimming class and finish the semester quietly, or I could keep talking about what I thought I saw and end up like Tyler. He said Tyler had been spreading rumors too, making up stories about the pool. And now Tyler was where he belonged, with the others who couldn't keep their mouths shut. He said the pool had been there long before the school, that it was built on something old, something that needed to be fed, and every few years someone had to join the swimmers to keep the balance. Usually, it was someone who wouldn't be missed much, a struggling student who might have dropped out anyway. But if I kept causing problems, it could just as easily be a senior with college plans. I went back to swimming class. I kept my mouth shut. I got my PE credit and graduated. Tyler never came back to school. His family moved away a month later, saying they needed a fresh start after their son's disappearance. The police investigated but found nothing. The pool was drained and searched, but it was just a normal swimming pool as far as they could tell. Coach Randall is still teaching there. I know because my younger cousin just started high school, and guess what class fits perfectly in her schedule? Beginning swimming at 7 in the morning. I tried to warn her, but she just laughed and said I was trying to scare her because I'd had a bad experience with an early morning class. She's been going for 3 weeks now. She says Coach Randall is really nice, very attentive to all the students, especially the ones who struggle, especially the quiet ones who won't be missed. I drive by the school sometimes at night, and I can see lights in the pool building even though it should be locked and empty. Sometimes I think about calling the police, but what would I say? That there are ghostly swimmers in the pool? That Coach Randall feeds students to something ancient living under the chlorinated water? They'd think I was crazy. Maybe I am crazy. But Tyler is still missing. And every year, at least one student from beginning swimming doesn't make it to the end of the semester. They always have a good reason for leaving. Family emergency, sudden illness, transferred schools. But they never come back. And late at night, when the pool building should be empty, the lights are always on. The drama club initiation. Theater kids were supposed to be the weird ones, the safe weird ones who sang show tunes in the hallway and weren't afraid to be themselves. That's why I joined drama club my junior year, thinking I'd finally found my people after 2 years of eating lunch alone in the library. The first meeting was everything I'd hoped for. About 20 kids sitting in a circle on the stage, playing improv games and laughing at inside jokes I didn't understand yet but wanted to. Mrs. Martinez ran the club. This energetic woman in her 40s who wore scarves and gestured wildly when she talked about the transformative power of theater. She welcomed me like I'd always been part of the group, had everyone introduce themselves with their name and favorite musical. There was Kevin, the senior who'd played the lead in every production since freshman year. Sarah and Emma, best friends who always played opposite each other. James, the tech guy who built all the sets and operated the light board. And then there was Cassie, sitting slightly apart from the circle, wearing all black and watching everyone with these intense dark eyes. When it was her turn to introduce herself, she just said her name, no favorite musical, and Mrs. Martinez moved on quickly like she was used to Cassie being different. The first few weeks were great. I was actually making friends, and we were preparing for the fall production of Little Shop of Horrors. I was just in the chorus, but I didn't care because I was part of something. After rehearsals, a bunch of us would go to this diner down the street and talk for hours about theater and movies and everything except homework. It was exactly the high school experience I'd been missing. Then, about a month into rehearsals, Kevin pulled me aside after practice. He said there was a drama club tradition I should know about, something they did with all the new members who'd proven themselves. An initiation of sorts, but not like a mean hazing thing, more like a welcome to the inner circle ceremony. He said it would happen after Friday's rehearsal, and I shouldn't tell anyone, especially not Mrs. Martinez, because she didn't approve of club traditions that weren't official school activities. I was honestly thrilled to be included in some secret tradition. It meant they really accepted me as part of the group. Friday came and rehearsal ran late, until almost 9 at night. Mrs. Martinez finally called it quits and said she'd see everyone next week, reminding us to be off school property within the next 15 minutes. But as she left, Kevin gave me a look that said to hang back. About 6 of us stayed behind, the core group as Kevin called them. Sarah and Emma were there, James, a couple of seniors I didn't know well, and Cassie, standing in the shadows by the curtain. Kevin said the tradition went back decades, to when the school first opened in the 1970s. Every year, the new members who were serious about theater would spend a night in the auditorium, telling ghost stories and cementing their bond as a troupe. It sounded harmless enough, though I was nervous about getting caught and getting in trouble. James had already disabled the alarm on one of the side doors, and we had sleeping bags stashed in the prop room. We set up in a circle on the stage, with just the ghost light on, that single bare bulb on a pole that theaters always leave burning. Kevin started with a story about a student who died during a performance of Macbeth back in the 80s, how sometimes you could still hear him reciting lines in the catwalks above the stage. Sarah and Emma told one together about the old drama teacher who supposedly haunted the costume room, moving things around and leaving notes on performances. They were good stories, creepy enough to be fun but obviously made up. Then it was Cassie's turn. She didn't tell a story exactly. Instead, she asked if we wanted to play a game. She said it was something the original drama club did, back when the school was new, a way to connect with the creative spirits that inspire performance. She pulled out this old wooden box from her backpack, carved with symbols that looked like some kind of runes or something. Inside was a mirror, but not a regular mirror. The glass was dark and cloudy like it was really old, and around the edges were more of those symbols. Cassie said we all had to look into it together and call upon the muses of theatre to bless our performance. It sounded like typical theatre kid dramatic nonsense, but everyone else seemed into it, so I went along with it. We all leaned in close to look at the mirror, while Cassie said some words in what sounded like Latin or maybe Greek. At first, nothing happened except I could see our distorted faces in the cloudy glass. Then the mirror started to clear, but instead of showing our reflection, it showed the stage from above, like we were looking down at ourselves from the catwalks. But there were more people in the image than in our actual circle. Shadowy figures standing behind each of us, getting clearer and more defined the longer we looked. The figure behind me was wearing some kind of old-fashioned theatre costume, maybe from the 1920s, with a white mask that only covered half its face. The visible half was wrong somehow, the features too sharp, the smile too wide. Sarah screamed first, breaking the spell or whatever it was, and we all jerked back from the mirror. But when I looked around, the shadows were still there, just barely visible in the dim light of the ghost light. They were moving now, circling us, and I could hear whispers in languages I didn't understand. Kevin tried to run for the door, but something, one of those shadows, blocked his path. Up close, I could see it more clearly and wished I couldn't. It wore the tattered remains of what might have been a Shakespearean costume, but its face was a tragedy mask that seemed to be part of its actual skin. James was shouting that this wasn't what was supposed to happen, that the initiation was just supposed to be staying overnight and maybe using a Ouija board. But Cassie was smiling, saying the ritual had worked perfectly, that we'd called the old troupe back. She said they'd been waiting for decades for someone to open the door properly. The original drama club, she explained while we huddled together in terror, had made a pact for eternal fame and success on the stage. But they'd gotten the ritual wrong, trapped themselves between the curtain of reality and performance. They'd been waiting for new actors to possess, new bodies to wear like costumes. The shadows were getting more solid now, more real, and I could feel the one behind me getting closer, its cold breath on my neck smelling like dust and old makeup. Emma started reciting the Lord's Prayer, which seemed to make them pause for a moment. That's when Mrs. Martinez burst through the door with a security guard, shouting about knowing we'd try this nonsense again. The moment the main lights came on, the shadows vanished like they'd never been there. But the mirror in Cassie's box was cracked down the middle, and there were burn marks on the stage floor where they'd been standing. Mrs. Martinez was furious, said she'd warned the previous years not to mess with that old mirror, that it had been nothing but trouble since it was donated in the 70s. She confiscated it and banned all of us from drama club for 2 weeks. But she also seemed scared, kept looking at the shadows in the corners of the auditorium and muttering something under her breath. When we came back after the suspension, things were different. Kevin couldn't remember his lines anymore. Would just stand there on stage with his mouth open like he was trying to speak, but couldn't. Sarah and Emma stopped being friends, said they kept seeing each other's faces change into something else when they looked too long. James refused to come near the theatre at all, dropped out of school entirely a month later. And Cassie disappeared the night we got suspended. Her parents said she'd run away, but I knew better. I'd seen her reflection in the cracked mirror as Mrs. Martinez carried it away. She was trapped in there with them, with the old troupe, and she was smiling like she'd finally found where she belonged. I quit drama club after that. Couldn't stand being on that stage knowing what was waiting in the shadows. But sometimes I still have to walk past the auditorium for other classes. And sometimes, if the lighting is just right, I can see them in the windows of the doors. The old troupe, still performing for an audience that isn't there. Still waiting for new actors to join their eternal show. Kevin graduated but never went to college. Just sits in his room all day now, according to his sister. She says sometimes she hears him rehearsing lines in the middle of the night, but they're from plays that were never written, in a voice that doesn't sound quite like his. The mirror is supposedly locked in the principal's office, but last week a freshman in drama club told me they'd found a box in the prop room. An old wooden box with strange symbols carved on it, empty except for a note in Cassie's handwriting. The show must go on. The detention room. Detention was supposed to be boring. That was the whole point of the punishment. Sit in a room for 2 hours after school, do homework or stare at the wall. Think about what you did wrong. I'd gotten detention for being late to first period too many times, which seemed unfair since it wasn't my fault my car was a piece of junk that wouldn't start in cold weather. But Principal Morrison didn't care about excuses, so there I was on a Thursday afternoon in room 108, the designated detention room. It was in the oldest part of the school, the wing they built in the 1950s that they kept threatening to renovate but never did. The room itself was weird, no windows and only one door, with desks that were bolted to the floor in perfectly straight rows. Mr. Brennan was the detention supervisor, this ancient teacher who'd been at the school forever and always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He sat at the front reading a newspaper while the 6 of us in detention pretended to do homework. There was Marcus, who was always in detention for fighting. Alexis, who'd been caught vaping in the bathroom for the 3rd time. 2 sophomores I didn't know, probably there for standard sophomore stupidity. And then there was Ben, this quiet kid from my grade who I'd never seen in trouble before. He kept staring at the clock on the wall, watching the minute hand move like his life depended on knowing the exact time. About 30 minutes in, the lights flickered. Not unusual for the old wing. The electrical system was probably held together with duct tape and hope. But when they came back on, the clock had stopped at 3:47. Mr. Brennan didn't even look up from his newspaper. Another 15 minutes passed, or at least it felt like 15 minutes, but the clock still said 3:47. I looked at my phone to check the actual time, but it was dead. Not low battery dead, but completely black screen won't turn on dead. I looked around and saw Alexis tapping at her phone too, getting the same result. That's when Ben started to panic, saying we needed to leave right now, that it was happening again. Mr. Brennan finally looked up, but his eyes were wrong. They were completely white, no iris or pupil, just white all the way across. He smiled and said in a voice that sounded like multiple people talking at once that detention wasn't over yet. Marcus jumped up and ran for the door, but when he grabbed the handle, it didn't budge. Not locked, but like the door had become part of the wall, just a decoration that looked like a door. The lights flickered again, and when they came back, the room was different. The same but different, like we were looking at it through old film or something. The desks were the same, but now there were names carved into them, names and dates going back decades. Tommy Peterson 1957, Never got out. Maria Santos 1963, still here. David Park 1971, time stopped. And more, so many more, covering every inch of the wooden desktops. Ben was crying now, saying his brother had told him about this, but he didn't believe it. His brother had gotten detention 5 years ago and came home different. Wouldn't talk about what happened, but warned Ben to never, ever get detention. The room started to stretch, the walls pulling away from us like the space was getting bigger, but we weren't moving. And in the new space, we could see them. Other students, dozens of them, sitting at desks that hadn't been there before. All in different styles of clothes from different decades, all with their heads down on their desks like they were sleeping. But they weren't sleeping, I could tell by how still they were, how their bodies looked hollow somehow. Mr. Brennan stood up, and he was taller than before, his body stretching up toward the ceiling that kept getting higher and higher. He said detention had been going on for a very long time, ever since the school was built on this spot. This spot that was special, where time could be bent and broken and made to hold people forever. He said we could leave if we gave him something in return. A year, he said. Just 1 year of our lives, added to the detention that never ends. We'd walk out and not remember, but we'd be 1 year older, 1 year closer to death. Or we could stay and become like the others, stuck in detention forever, our bodies aging while our minds stayed trapped in this endless afternoon. Marcus tried to fight, throwing a desk at Mr. Brennan, but it passed right through him like he was made of smoke. Alexis was praying, clutching a cross necklace I hadn't noticed before. The two sophomores were holding each other and sobbing. But Ben was walking toward the other students, the ones from different decades. He was looking for someone, checking faces until he found what he was looking for. His brother, still 15 years old, still in the same clothes he'd worn 5 years ago, but his eyes were open and aware and terrified. Ben tried to pull him up, to wake him up, but his brother couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only stare. That's when I noticed the other faces, recognized some of them, kids who'd supposedly moved away, dropped out, disappeared. All here, all trapped in eternal detention. Mr. Brennan was laughing now, a sound like breaking glass and screaming wind. He said we had 1 minute to decide, pointing at the clock that had started moving backward. 3:47, 3:46, 3:45. I looked at the door again and saw that it was changing, becoming more real, more solid. Like maybe when the clock hit a certain time, we'd have a chance. I grabbed Ben and pulled him away from his brother, shouted at the others that we needed to be ready. When the clock hit 3:30, the door would be real for just a second. That's what the carvings on the desks were trying to tell us. The ones who got out, they all mentioned 3:30. The clock kept ticking backward. 3:33, 3:32, 3:31. Mr. Brennan realized what we were doing and started moving toward us, his stretched body bending in impossible ways. 3:30. The door solidified and Marcus hit it with his shoulder, breaking it open. We ran, all 6 of us, while behind us Mr. Brennan howled and the trapped students moaned. We ran through hallways that weren't supposed to exist, past classrooms full of students from different time periods, all frozen in place. Finally, we burst out of the main entrance into daylight. Real daylight. Our phones worked again, showing it was 5:47 p.m. 2 hours had passed in the real world. We'd served our detention. But when I got home and looked in the mirror, there was a streak of grey in my hair that hadn't been there before, and my mom commented that I looked tired, older somehow. We all agreed never to talk about it, never to tell anyone what happened. But Ben couldn't let it go, kept trying to find a way to save his brother. He got detention on purpose the next week, thinking he could figure out the secret. He never came back. The official story was that he'd run away, troubled kid from a troubled family. But I knew better. Room 108 is still the detention room. Mr. Brennan is still the supervisor. And every few years, a student serves detention and never quite makes it home. Their parents get a call about them running away or transferring schools. But really, they're still there, sitting at those bolted-down desks, trapped at 3:47 on a Thursday afternoon that never ends. I graduated last year, but I still drive by the school sometimes. And in the window of room 108, even though it's supposed to be windowless, I can see faces. Ben's face, his brother's face, and all the others who got detention at the wrong time, in the wrong room, with the wrong supervisor. Still serving their time. Still waiting for 3:30. Still hoping someone will remember they existed. The library's restricted section. Every high school library has books that students aren't supposed to read, usually stuff with adult content that parents complained about. But Jefferson High's library had an actual restricted section, locked behind a metal gate in the basement stacks that nobody talked about. I only found out about it because I was a library aide my senior year, which basically meant I got study hall credit for shelving books and checking them in. Mrs. Holloway, the librarian who'd been there since the school opened, usually had me doing mindless stuff like organizing the fiction section or updating the computer catalog. But one day in November, she asked me to help her with something different. She needed someone to go down to the basement stacks and retrieve a box of old yearbooks for the reunion committee. I'd never been down there before, didn't even know we had basement stacks until she handed me a ring of old keys and pointed to a door marked "Staff Only" behind the circulation desk. The stairs down were narrow and steep, with a single bulb every 10 feet that barely lit anything. The basement itself was like a completely different world from the bright, modern library above. Row after row of metal shelving stretched into the darkness, packed with old books that smelled like mold and decay. Mrs. Holloway had drawn me a little map to find the yearbooks, said they were in Section D, row 12. But as I walked through the stacks, counting rows, I kept getting distracted by the weird stuff on the shelves. Books in languages I didn't recognize, with symbols instead of letters on the spines. Medical texts from the 1800s with detailed drawings of surgeries that looked more like torture. And then I found the gate. It was at the back of Section C, this heavy metal gate like you'd see in a prison, with a chain and padlock that looked ancient. Behind it, I could see more shelves, but these books looked different. They were all bound in black or dark red leather, no titles on the spines, just numbers. And there was something about them that made me want to open that gate, like they were calling to me. I found the yearbooks where Mrs. Holloway said they'd be and brought them upstairs. But I couldn't stop thinking about that restricted section. When I asked Mrs. Holloway about it, trying to sound casual, her whole demeanor changed. She went from friendly librarian to something harder, scarier. She said that section was off limits, had been since an incident in 1982. Some books, she said, were donated by people who didn't understand what they were giving away. Books that shouldn't exist, that should have been burned but were too dangerous to destroy. So they kept them locked up, hoping everyone would forget they were there. She made me promise never to go near that gate again. But promises are hard to keep when curiosity is eating you alive. I started researching the incident from 1982, going through old newspapers in the archive. Found a small article about 3 students who'd been hospitalized after breaking into the school library at night. They'd been found in catatonic states, unable to speak or move, their eyes wide open but unseeing. They recovered eventually, but all 3 transferred schools immediately after. The article didn't say what had caused their condition, just that it was under investigation. I tracked down one of the students, David Chen, who was now working at a tech company in town. At first he refused to talk to me, but when I mentioned the restricted section, he went pale and agreed to meet me at a coffee shop. He said they'd been idiots, him and his friends, thinking they were so clever picking the lock on the gate. They'd wanted to find banned books, maybe some old pornography or something to laugh about. But the books in that section weren't normal books. When you opened them, things came out. Not physically, but into your mind, images and words and knowledge that human brains weren't meant to process. His friend Marcus had opened one numbered 667 and immediately started screaming about the walls breathing and time flowing backward. Jennifer had touched one labeled 1203 and fell to the floor convulsing, speaking in tongues that sounded like multiple languages at once. David himself had only glimpsed inside number 432 before slamming it shut, but what he saw still gave him nightmares. He said it was like looking at reality from the outside, seeing how fragile everything we think is real actually is. He warned me to stay away, said some knowledge wasn't worth having. But I was 18 and stupid and thought I was invincible. So I made a plan. I volunteered to stay late one Thursday to help with inventory, told Mrs. Holloway I could lock up when I was done. She was hesitant but eventually agreed, giving me her keys with another warning about staying away from the basement. I waited until I was sure she was gone, then headed down to the stacks. The gate lock was old, the kind you could pick if you knew what you were doing. And thanks to YouTube and too much free time, I knew what I was doing. It took about 10 minutes, but finally the lock clicked open. I should have stopped there, should have just looked at the books from outside the gate and left. But I had to know what made them so dangerous. I picked number 23 because it was thin and looked less threatening than the others. The moment I touched it, I felt something electric run up my arm, like the book was alive somehow. When I opened it, the pages were blank at first. Then words started appearing, but not printed words, more like they were bleeding through the paper from somewhere else. They weren't in English, weren't in any language I recognized, but somehow I could read them. They were instructions for something, a ritual maybe, involving circles and candles and words that hurt to think about. And as I read, I started to understand things I shouldn't understand, about the spaces between spaces, the things that live in the corners of our vision, the way reality is just a thin membrane over something much worse. I tried to close the book, but my hands wouldn't move. The words kept coming, faster now, filling my head with knowledge that burned. I saw the true history of the school, built on a site where something terrible had happened centuries ago. I saw the things that fed on students' fear and confusion, growing stronger with each generation. I saw Mrs. Holloway as she really was, not a librarian but a guardian, keeping the books locked away while simultaneously being corrupted by their presence. And I saw what would happen if all the books were ever opened at once, the complete breakdown of everything we think of as real. That's when Mrs. Holloway found me. But it wasn't the Mrs. Holloway from upstairs. This version was older, ancient, with eyes that held centuries of terrible knowledge. She took the book from my hands, and the moment it left my grip, I collapsed. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. My parents were there, looking worried and confused. They said Mrs. Holloway had found me having a seizure in the library and called 911. I'd been unconscious for 3 days. The doctors couldn't explain what had happened, said all my tests came back normal, but I'd been in some kind of coma. When I got back to school a week later, Mrs. Holloway acted like nothing had happened. She was the same friendly librarian as always, but sometimes I'd catch her watching me with those ancient eyes I'd seen in the basement. She never said anything about that night, never acknowledged that I'd broken into the restricted section. But she also never let me work alone in the library again. The knowledge from the book didn't go away though. I could still see things others couldn't, understand things that should be impossible. I knew which students weren't really students, which teachers were something else wearing human faces. I could see the symbols carved into the school's foundation, keeping something trapped beneath. And I could feel the other books calling to me, wanting to be opened, wanting to share their terrible secrets. I graduated as fast as I could and left town for college. But the knowledge followed me. I still see things, still understand things I shouldn't. And sometimes, late at night, I can feel book number 23 calling to me, wanting me to come back and finish reading. Mrs. Holloway emails me sometimes, just checking in, she says. But I know what she's really doing. She's making sure I haven't told anyone, haven't tried to find similar books in other libraries, because they're out there, in restricted sections and private collections all over the world. Books that shouldn't exist, containing knowledge that could break reality if it ever got out. Last month, I got a package with no return address. Inside was a photo of the restricted section gate. It was open, and all the shelves behind it were empty. On the back of the photo, in Mrs. Holloway's handwriting, "They've been moved. Your turn to guard them now." I haven't opened the storage unit key that came with the photo, but I know I will eventually, because once you've read even one page from those books, you're part of it forever, part of the system that keeps the knowledge locked away while slowly being consumed by it. Just like Mrs. Holloway, just like the librarian before her, just like I'll be, whether I want to or not. The senior prank. Senior pranks were a tradition at Millbrook High, but after what happened to the class of 2018, the administration tried to ban them completely. Of course, that just made our class of 2023 more determined to pull off something legendary. The planning started in March, 2 months before graduation. There were 12 of us in on it, all people I'd known since freshman year, all people I trusted. We called ourselves the Midnight Crew because we decided whatever we did would happen at night when the school was empty. Jake was our unofficial leader, the guy who could talk anyone into anything. His girlfriend Ashley was the planner, making lists and schedules like we were planning a heist. Tommy knew the school's security system because his dad installed it. Rachel could pick any lock in under a minute. And the rest of us were just along for the ride, excited to be part of something that would be remembered. The plan was simple but ambitious. We'd sneak in on a Sunday night and transform the school into a giant maze using plastic sheeting and construction materials Tommy could get from his uncle's company. Every hallway would be blocked off, creating new paths that led to dead ends or looped back on themselves. We figured it would take the janitors all day Monday to tear it down, giving everyone a free day off school. Harmless, funny, memorable. We picked May 1st, exactly 1 month before graduation. Tommy disabled the security cameras remotely, said they'd just show a loop of empty hallways all night. Rachel got us in through a service door by the gym, and by 10 p.m., we were all inside with our supplies, ready to create chaos. The first hour went perfectly. We'd gotten the main hallway done, plastic sheeting creating false walls and passages that looked convincing in the dim emergency lighting. Everyone was laughing, taking pictures, already imagining how confused everyone would be Monday morning. That's when we heard the music. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the school. This old-timey music like from the 1950s. Jake said it was probably just a janitor's radio, but the janitors didn't work Sunday nights. We tried to ignore it and keep working, but the music got louder, and underneath it, we could hear voices. Laughing, talking, the sounds of a party. Ashley wanted to leave right then, said something felt wrong, but Jake convinced us to check it out. Said maybe some other group was pulling their own prank. We followed the sound to the old gymnasium, the one they'd closed after building the new sports complex. The doors were chained shut from the outside, had been for years, but the chains were on the floor now, coiled like snakes, and the doors were slightly open with light spilling out. When we pushed them open, we walked into 1955. The gym was decorated for prom, with banners reading Millbrook High Senior Prom 1955, and balloons in school colors that should have been rotted away decades ago. The basketball hoops were gone, replaced by hanging lights that cast everything in a golden glow. And it was full of people, all dressed in 1950s formal wear, dancing and laughing like nothing was wrong. Like it wasn't 2023. Like they weren't all supposed to be dead. Because I recognized some of them from old yearbooks I'd seen while researching for a history project. These were students from the class of 1955, the same age as us, but from almost 70 years ago. One of them, a girl in a pink dress with her hair in perfect victory rolls, noticed us standing in the doorway. She smiled and waved us in, calling out that we were just in time for the coronation. That's when I noticed that all of them had something wrong with their eyes. They were too bright, almost glowing, and they didn't blink. None of them blinked. Jake, being Jake, actually stepped forward like he was going to talk to them. But the moment his foot crossed the threshold into the gym, his clothes changed. His jeans and hoodie transformed into a 1950s style suit, and his phone fell from his pocket, turning to dust before it hit the ground. He turned back to us with those same glowing, unblinking eyes and held out his hand to Ashley. "Come on, baby," he said, but his voice was different, older somehow. "They're about to announce King and Queen." Ashley screamed and backed away, but Jake kept coming, moving in this jerky, unnatural way like a marionette. Tommy tried to pull him back, but the moment he touched Jake, he started changing too. His clothes shifted, his hair slicked back, and that same glowing look took over his eyes. Within seconds, we'd lost 2 of the midnight crew to whatever this was. The rest of us ran, but the school had changed. The plastic sheeting we'd put up was gone, replaced by decorations from the 1950s. Every classroom we passed was full of students from that era, all frozen in time, all with those glowing eyes. Rachel tried to pick the lock on an exit door, but her tools turned to rust in her hands. Our phones were dead, not just powered off but actually decaying, screens cracking and batteries leaking acid. The music followed us everywhere, getting louder when we tried to hide, softer when we moved toward the gym, like it was herding us back. Then Ashley found something that made everything worse. A newspaper clipping on a bulletin board that shouldn't have existed, dated May 2nd, 1955. The headline read, "12 seniors missing after prom night prank goes wrong." The article described how 12 students had broken into the school to pull a senior prank but were never seen again. The only trace was a message written in the gym: "The party never ends." The 12 names in the article were our names. Not similar names, not coincidentally the same. Our exact names, 70 years before we were born. That's when we understood. This wasn't just happening to us. It had happened before, would happen again, every time a group of 12 seniors tried to pull a prank on May 1st. We were trapped in some kind of loop, doomed to become part of the eternal prom. By now, half our group had been transformed. They stood at the end of the hallway, smiling those 2 wide smiles, beckoning us to join them. Rachel had an idea, though. If this was a loop, there had to be a way to break it. The original 12 from 1955 were still here, still at their prom. If we could find them, maybe we could switch places, let them finally leave while we... I didn't want to think about that part. We made it back to the gym, those of us who were left. The prom was in full swing, but now I could see the truth underneath. The dancers were skeletal, their fancy clothes hanging on bones. The decorations were cobwebs and dust shaped into the illusion of beauty. And on the stage, about to be crowned king and queen, were 2 figures that looked exactly like Jake and Ashley. But they were wearing name tags from 1955. The original Jake and Ashley, trapped here for 70 years. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran to the stage and grabbed the crown from the original Jake's head. The moment I touched it, everything stopped. The music cut off, the dancers froze, and the lights went out. In the darkness, I heard a voice, old and tired and grateful. "Thank you," it said. "We can finally rest. But someone has to stay. Someone always has to stay." When the lights came back on, we were in the modern gym. No decorations, no dancers, just the 6 of us who hadn't been transformed. Jake and Tommy and the others who'd changed were gone. We searched the whole school but never found them. The security footage Tommy had tampered with showed us entering but never leaving. It also showed Jake and Tommy and the others leaving at 6 a.m., getting in their cars, driving away. But that wasn't them. I know because I saw the real them 2 weeks later. I was looking through the 1955 yearbook for a final project, and there they were, Jake and Ashley and Tommy and all the others who'd been transformed, in black and white photos from 70 years ago, smiling at the camera, listed as members of the class of 1955. There was even a caption under Jake's photo, "Most likely to pull the ultimate prank." We never told anyone what really happened. Who would believe us? The fake Jake and fake Ashley and fake everyone else graduated with us, went off to college, lived their lives. But sometimes they'd look at those of us who knew the truth, and for just a second, their eyes would glow. A reminder, a warning. The school banned senior pranks after that. But I know it won't matter. In 2093, 70 years from now, 12 seniors will get the idea to break into the school on May 1st. They'll have the same names as us. They'll think they're being original, and the cycle will continue. The party never ends. It just waits for new guests. Epilogue. The connection. If you've read all 5 stories, you might have noticed something. Room 108, where detention never ends. The pool that needs to be fed. The restricted section with books that shouldn't exist. The drama club's cursed mirror. The senior prank time loop. They're all from different schools, different years, different states even. But they're connected. I know because I've been collecting these stories for 10 years now. Ever since my own experience at Westfield High, the one I can't quite remember, but that left me with premature grey hair and a fear of empty classrooms. There's a pattern to these places. Schools built on specific sites, usually where something tragic happened before. A hospital that burned down, a cemetery that was moved, a house where a family disappeared. The administrators know, some of them at least. That's why there are always rules that don't quite make sense. Don't go to the pool after dark. Don't get detention in room 108. Stay away from the library basement. Never join drama club if you're sensitive. Don't pull pranks on certain dates. They're trying to protect us without admitting what they're protecting us from, because admitting it would make it real, would give it power. But it already has power. It feeds on teenagers specifically, on that particular mix of hormones and fear and rebellion that happens between 14 and 18. That's why these things only happen in high schools. Elementary kids are too innocent. College students are too jaded. But high schoolers, we're perfect prey. We're old enough to make bad decisions, but young enough to believe we're invincible. We form tight groups that can be isolated and picked off. We keep secrets from adults who might help us. And we're naturally drawn to the forbidden, the dangerous, the things we're told not to do. The entities, or whatever they are, they've learned to use our schools as hunting grounds. They hide in plain sight, disguised as normal places with arbitrary rules. And every year they feed. A swimmer who doesn't come back. A drama student who vanishes. A detention that goes too long. A senior who pulls one last prank. The statistics say these kids ran away, transferred, dropped out. But we know better. Those of us who've seen behind the curtain, who've survived our encounters. We know they're still there, trapped in pools and mirrors and endless afternoons. Still 17 forever. Still screaming. I'm 32 now, and I've never stopped investigating. I've found similar stories from the 1970s, the 1960s, even one from 1943. Always the same pattern. Always the same rules being broken. Always the same endings. And now I'm seeing something new. The stories are spreading. What used to be confined to specific schools in specific towns is moving. The pool entity showed up in 3 different states last year. The detention room phenomenon has been reported in 12 schools across the country. They're learning, evolving, spreading like a virus through the education system. And nobody's stopping them because nobody believes they exist. That's why I'm sharing these stories. Not to scare you, though you should be scared, but to warn you. If your school has a room nobody talks about, don't go there. If there's a teacher who's been there too long and has strange eyes, avoid them. If upperclassmen warn you about certain traditions or places or times, listen to them. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where reality seems to be bending, where time isn't working right, where people aren't quite people anymore, run. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to save anyone. Just run. Because the things that hunt in high schools have been doing it for a very long time. They're patient. They're hungry. And they're waiting for you to make that one mistake. The bell's about to ring. Class is about to start. And somewhere, in some school, another student is about to break the rules. Let's hope it's not you. The new kid's first week. Moving to Cedar Heights in the middle of November was already hard enough without what happened next. My mom got transferred for her job, and we had to leave everything behind in Florida to come to this small town in Minnesota where it was already snowing. I remember walking into Northside High that first Monday, feeling like everyone was staring at me even though they probably weren't. The office lady was nice enough, gave me my schedule and a map of the school that made no sense because the building was like a maze of additions from different decades. First period was history with Mr. Coleman, and when I walked in late with my new student slip, everyone actually did stare. Mr. Coleman pointed to an empty seat in the back corner, right next to these 2 kids who looked like they could be related. They both had the same dark hair, same pale skin, same way of sitting perfectly still like mannequins. The girl turned to me first and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said her name was Luna, and the boy next to her was her cousin Marcus, though they looked more like siblings to me. Luna offered to show me around during lunch, since we apparently had the same lunch period. I was grateful because eating alone on your first day is basically social suicide, especially when you're starting in the middle of the semester. When lunch came, Luna was waiting for me outside the cafeteria like she promised. But Marcus was there too, standing so close to her they were almost touching, both of them smiling those same empty smiles. They didn't take me to the cafeteria though. Instead, they led me to this part of the school I hadn't seen yet, down a stairwell that smelled like rust and old water. They said they ate lunch in the old music room because it was quieter and nobody bothered them there. The room was weird, full of broken instruments and sheet music scattered on the floor like someone had thrown it around in anger. Luna pulled out a bag of chips and offered me some, but when I reached for them, Marcus grabbed my wrist. Not hard, but firm enough that I couldn't pull away without making it awkward. He said I had interesting veins, could see my pulse so clearly. Luna laughed like this was a normal thing to say and told him to stop being weird. But she was looking at my wrist too, both of them staring at it like they were hungry. I made some excuse about needing to use the bathroom and got out of there as fast as I could without running. The next day, they were waiting by my locker before first period. Luna said they wanted to apologize for making me uncomfortable. that Marcus sometimes said things without thinking. She invited me to hang out after school, said there was this cool abandoned building near the train tracks where kids went to practice graffiti and skateboard. I should have said no, but I was desperate to make friends, and they were the only people who'd talked to me so far. Plus it was daytime and public enough that I figured it would be safe. After school, I met them in the parking lot and we walked to the abandoned building, which turned out to be an old factory or something. The place was covered in graffiti like Luna said, but it also looked like nobody had been there in years. All the tags were faded and peeling, and there were no skateboards or kids anywhere. Marcus said everyone must be at the other spot today, but he said it in this flat way like he was reading from a script. They led me deeper into the building, through rooms full of broken machinery and walls with holes that looked punched through from the inside. Finally, we got to this big open space that might have been a warehouse floor once. Luna and Marcus stood on either side of me, and that's when I noticed how cold it had gotten. I could see my breath, even though it hadn't been that cold outside. Luna said they'd been waiting for someone like me for so long. Someone new, someone who didn't know the stories, someone who would follow them willingly. Marcus started walking in a circle around me, dragging something metal along the concrete floor that made this horrible scraping sound. I tried to leave, but Luna blocked my path, moving faster than anyone should be able to move. Her face was different now, longer somehow, with too many teeth when she smiled. She said they needed to feed, had been so hungry since the last new student 3 years ago. That kid had moved away suddenly, everyone said. But Luna laughed when she said it like it was the funniest joke. Marcus was getting closer with whatever he was dragging, and I could see now it was a piece of rebar, rusty and sharp at one end. I did the only thing I could think of and screamed as loud as possible. Not just a regular scream, but this primal, terrified sound I didn't know I could make. And it worked, kind of. They both stopped and looked toward the entrance, and I heard voices in the distance. A group of actual kids were coming to check out the building, probably heard me scream. Luna hissed something at Marcus that didn't sound like any language I knew, and they both backed away into the shadows. I ran toward the voices, found 3 older students with skateboards who asked if I was okay. I told them some kids were chasing me, trying to mess with a new student, and they walked me back to the main road. When I got to school the next day, Luna and Marcus weren't there. They weren't there the next day either, or the day after that. When I finally asked another student about them, she looked confused and said there was no Luna or Marcus in our history class. She said those desks had been empty all semester. I checked the yearbook from last year, went through every single page. No Luna, no Marcus, no one who looked even remotely like them. But I found something else. An article from the school newspaper, 3 years old, about a new student named David Kim who'd gone missing his first week. Last seen walking toward the old factory with 2 students nobody could identify. His body was never found, and he was presumed to be a runaway. The article included a quote from another student who said David had mentioned making friends with 2 kids who ate lunch in the old music room. But when they checked, that room had been locked and empty for years. I started eating lunch in the library after that, somewhere bright and public with lots of witnesses. And I never followed anyone to a secondary location again, no matter how desperately I wanted friends. Sometimes I walk past that old factory on my way home, and I swear I can see 2 figures in the broken windows, watching, waiting, looking for the next new student who doesn't know any better. I tried to warn the girl who transferred in after winter break, told her to be careful who she trusted, but she looked at me like I was crazy, said I was just trying to scare her. Last week, she mentioned these 2 kids who invited her to see something cool after school. A boy and a girl who looked like they could be related. She hasn't been in school for 3 days now. The office says she's sick, but I know better. I know she followed them somewhere she shouldn't have. And I know they're still out there, still hungry, still waiting for the next new kid to walk through those doors. The janitor's night shift. I needed money for college, and the night janitor position at my high school paid $15 an hour, which was way better than minimum wage at McDonald's. Plus, I figured cleaning my own school would be easy since I already knew the layout, and I could listen to music while I worked. Mr. Peterson, the head custodian, interviewed me in his tiny office in the basement. He was probably 60, with thick glasses and hands that looked like they'd been doing manual labor forever. He asked weird questions though, like was I comfortable being alone, did I scare easily, and had I ever seen anything unusual at the school? I said no to everything because I needed the job, even though the questions made me uncomfortable. He hired me for weekends, Friday and Saturday nights, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. He said those were the easiest shifts because there were no sports events or activities to work around. He gave me a massive ring of keys, probably 30 of them, and a list of tasks that seemed pretty straightforward. Empty trash, mop floors, clean bathrooms, lock all doors, set the alarm when leaving. My first shift was that Friday, and I showed up right at 10 p.m., using the key marked with red tape to get in through the service entrance. The school was completely different at night. All those fluorescent lights turned off except for the emergency exits. I had to use my flashlight to find the janitor's closet where all the supplies were kept. The silence was the worst part, just the hum of the ventilation system and my footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. I started with the first floor, going classroom by classroom with my cart full of cleaning supplies. It was actually kind of peaceful at first, just me and my music, methodically working through each room. But around midnight, when I was cleaning the science wing, I heard something from the second floor. It sounded like footsteps, but not regular walking, more like someone dragging something heavy. I turned off my music and listened, and the sound stopped immediately. I figured it was probably just the pipes or the building settling. Old buildings make weird noises, everyone knows that. I went back to work, but I kept my music lower so I could hear if anything else happened. About an hour later, I was in the bathroom on the first floor when all the stall doors slammed shut at once. Not like they were caught by wind or anything, but forcefully, like someone had kicked them all in sequence. I stood there frozen with my mop, waiting for someone to jump out and laugh at the prank. But nobody came out. When I finally got the courage to check, all the stalls were empty. I decided to take my break early, heading to the custodian break room in the basement that Mr. Peterson had shown me. It was this cramped little room with a coffee maker from the 1980s and a couch that smelled like cigarettes even though nobody had smoked in the building for decades. I locked the door and tried to calm down, telling myself I was being paranoid. But when I opened the door to go back to work, the hallway lights were on. Not all of them, just a path leading from the break room to the boiler room at the end of the hall. Like someone was showing me where to go. I should have left right then, should have just walked out and quit, but I needed this job. So I followed the lights, because what else was I going to do? The boiler room door was open, which was wrong because Mr. Peterson had specifically shown me that it should always be locked. Inside, the boilers were running even though it was May and they shouldn't have been on, and standing next to the biggest boiler was Mr. Peterson. But something was wrong with him. His eyes were reflecting the light like a cat's, and his smile was too wide, showing too many teeth. He said I was doing a good job, that he'd been watching me work, which was impossible because he'd left hours ago. I'd seen his car leave the parking lot. He walked toward me, but his movement was wrong, too smooth, like he was gliding instead of walking. He said the school needed dedicated workers, people who understood that some jobs were more than just cleaning. Some jobs were about maintaining the balance, keeping things fed, making sure the old agreements were honored. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I kept backing away as he got closer. That's when I noticed the wall behind the boiler. It was covered in photos, dozens of them, all school ID photos of students. Some looked recent, some looked decades old, but they all had red X's drawn over their faces. And at the bottom of each photo was a date. Mr. Peterson saw me looking, and his smile got even wider. He said those were the ones who didn't work out, the ones who couldn't handle the real job. But he had a good feeling about me, said I had the right energy, the right fear. He reached out to grab me, and his hand was burning hot, like touching a stove. I jerked away and ran, could hear him laughing behind me, but not following. I made it to the exit and fumbled with the keys, finally getting the door open and running to my car. When I got home, I called the school's main number and left a voicemail saying I quit. Family emergency. Sorry for the inconvenience. Monday morning, I went to the office to return the keys. The secretary looked confused and said there was no Mr. Peterson on staff. The head custodian was a woman named Mrs. Chen, had been for 5 years. She showed me the staff directory to prove it. But I still had the keys he'd given me, still had his signature on my hiring paperwork. The secretary said the signature was illegible and the paperwork wasn't properly filed. So technically I'd never been hired at all, which meant I'd been in the school illegally all weekend. She said I was lucky they weren't pressing charges for trespassing. I left the keys and got out of there, but I did some research when I got home. There was a janitor named Carl Peterson who worked at the school, but he died in 1987, in the boiler room. He'd been doing maintenance on the old heating system when something went wrong, and he was essentially cooked alive. They found him 3 days later when people complained about a smell. The news articles said it was an accident, but there were rumors about strange circumstances, like how the boiler room door had been locked from the inside, and how they found student ID cards in his pockets, 7 of them, from kids who'd gone missing over the years. The school covered it up, said the IDs were found elsewhere, that there was no connection. But those 7 students were never found. I drive by the school sometimes at night, and I always see lights on in the basement, moving from window to window like someone's making rounds. My friend Tommy just got a job there as a night janitor. He says his supervisor is this really nice older guy named Mr. Peterson. I tried to warn him, but he thinks I'm just jealous that he got the job I quit. He's been working there for 2 weeks now. Last night, he didn't answer my texts. This morning, his parents called the police because he never came home. The school says he never showed up for his shift, that they have no record of him working there. But I know better. I know he's probably a photo on that wall now, another red X, another one who didn't work out. And somewhere in that school, Mr. Peterson is still making his rounds, still looking for the right person to help him with the real job, whatever that is, whatever he's been doing since 1987, whatever he needs those students for. The tutor sessions. My grades in calculus were tanking hard by October of my senior year, and I needed at least a B to keep my scholarship to State University. Mrs. Williams suggested I get a tutor, and there was a bulletin board outside the counseling office where older students and recent graduates posted tutoring services. Most of them wanted $30 or $40 an hour, which I definitely couldn't afford. But there was one index card that caught my eye, handwritten in perfect cursive. Free math tutoring for dedicated students. Evening sessions. Call Daniel. Free sounded perfect, and when I called the number, Daniel sounded normal enough. He said he was a sophomore at the local community college, graduated from our high school 2 years ago, and wanted to give back by helping struggling students. We agreed to meet that Thursday at 7 p.m. in the school library, which stayed open until 9 for students who needed to study. Daniel was already there when I arrived, sitting at one of the back tables with a bunch of textbooks spread out. He looked older than a college sophomore, maybe mid-20s, but I figured he might have taken a gap year or something. He was wearing this formal button-up shirt and tie, which seemed weird for a tutoring session, but maybe he came from work. The first session actually went really well. He explained derivatives in a way that finally made sense, and he was patient when I kept making the same mistakes. He said I had potential, I just needed to think about math differently, see the patterns underneath the numbers. We scheduled twice-weekly sessions, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. For the first 2 weeks, everything was normal, and my grades actually started improving. But then Daniel started getting weird. He'd ask personal questions that had nothing to do with math. Did I live alone or with family? Did anyone know I was getting tutored? What time did I usually go to sleep? When I tried to redirect to the math problems, he'd say understanding a student's life helped him teach better. The library started feeling different during our sessions too. Even though other students were supposedly there, I never saw anyone else in our section. The lights would flicker sometimes, and it would get cold enough that I could see my breath. Daniel never seemed to notice, just kept writing equations and watching me solve them. The 4th week, he suggested we move our sessions to his apartment. He said the library was too distracting and he had better materials at home. When I said I wasn't comfortable with that, his whole demeanor changed. His friendly smile disappeared and he stared at me with these flat, emotionless eyes. He said I was being ungrateful, that he was doing this for free and I should show more appreciation. Then, just as quickly, he smiled again and apologized, said he was stressed from his own classes. But something had shifted, and I knew I needed to stop the tutoring. I tried to cancel our next session, but he showed up at the library anyway. He said we had a commitment to each other, that I couldn't just quit when things got challenging. I said I wasn't quitting math, just the tutoring, but he wouldn't accept that. He followed me when I tried to leave, staying just far enough behind that it wasn't technically following, but close enough that I knew he was there. When I got to my car, there was a note on the windshield in his handwriting, "See you Thursday." I didn't go Thursday. Instead, I asked my friend Jamie to come with me to the library to study, figuring Daniel wouldn't do anything if I wasn't alone. But when we got there, Daniel was at our usual table with another student, a freshman girl who looked terrified but was trying to hide it. I walked over and asked if she was okay, and Daniel stood up fast enough to knock his chair over. He said this was a private session and I needed to leave. The girl looked at me with pleading eyes but didn't say anything. I told her she could study with Jamie and me if she wanted, that we had room at our table. Daniel grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and pulled me aside. He whispered that I was making a mistake, that I didn't understand what I was interfering with. He said some students were special, had potential that needed to be cultivated properly, and if I kept getting in the way, I'd regret it. Jamie came over then, asking if everything was okay, and Daniel let go of my arm. He smiled that fake smile and said we were just discussing advanced calculus concepts. Then he packed up his things and left, but not before whispering to the freshman girl that he'd see her tomorrow. She started crying the moment he was gone. Her name was Sophie, and she said Daniel had been tutoring her for a week. At first it was fine, but then he started showing up places he shouldn't be. Outside her house, in the parking lot after school, even at her part-time job at the mall. He said he was just making sure she was safe, that the world was dangerous for smart girls. We went to the school administration together the next day. But when we described Daniel, they said no recent graduate by that name had registered as a tutor. They checked their records and found a Daniel Morrison who'd graduated 2 years ago, but he'd died in a car accident 6 months after graduation. They showed us his yearbook photo. It was the same person who'd been tutoring us. The administration thought we were pranking them or confused, suggested we were stressed about college applications. But Sophie and I knew what we'd seen, who we'd been talking to. We did more research and found 3 other students over the past 2 years who'd reported a creepy tutor named Daniel. All of them had eventually transferred schools or moved away. One of them, a boy named Alex, had disappeared entirely. His parents said he'd run away, but his friend told us Alex had been getting tutored by someone who matched Daniel's description. The night before he disappeared, Alex had told his friend the tutor wanted to show him something special, something that would change how he understood everything. We never saw Daniel again after that confrontation in the library. But sometimes, when I'm studying late at night, I get texts from an unknown number. Just math equations at first, then messages asking if I'm reaching my potential. Sophie gets them too. We've changed our numbers twice, but the messages always find us. Last week, the messages changed. Instead of equations, they're addresses. The addresses of other students who are struggling with math. Students who might need a tutor. Students who don't know to say no when someone offers free help. I try to warn them when I can, but they look at me like I'm crazy. Why would they be scared of free tutoring? Why would they turn down help from a nice college student who just wants to give back? They don't understand that some help comes with a price you can't see until it's too late. And Daniel, or whatever he really is still out there. Still looking for dedicated students. Still offering free sessions. Still cultivating potential in ways that no one wants to understand. The transfer student's mistake. I transferred to Westfield High in the middle of October. Not the best timing, I know. Everyone had already formed their groups by then, and I was just this random kid showing up 2 months into the school year. My dad got relocated for work, so we had to move from Texas all the way to Oregon. The weather alone was enough of a shock, going from sunshine every day to constant gray skies and drizzle. But the hardest part was definitely the social aspect. Walking into that school on my first day felt like walking into a party where everyone knew each other and I was the uninvited guest. The first few days were rough. I ate lunch in the library, pretending to be really interested in whatever book I grabbed off the shelf. The librarian started giving me these pitying looks by day 3, which somehow made it worse. But then on Thursday, something changed. I was sitting in chemistry class, trying to figure out the lab assignment on my own since I didn't have a partner, when this girl turned around from the desk in front of me. Her name was Maya, and she had this really friendly smile that didn't seem fake like some of the other kids who talked to me. She asked if I wanted to join her group for the lab. I said yes immediately, probably too eagerly, but she didn't seem to mind. Her lab partner was this quiet guy named Derek, who barely looked up from his notebook when she introduced us. But Maya made up for his silence by talking enough for all 3 of us. She asked me about Texas, about the move, about what I thought of Westfield so far, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I actually felt like someone genuinely wanted to know. After class, Maya invited me to sit with her group at lunch the next day. She said they usually sat at the tables near the art room because it was quieter there. I agreed, obviously. Finally, I wouldn't have to hide in the library anymore. That night, I actually felt optimistic about school for the first time. Maybe this move wouldn't be so bad after all. The next day at lunch, I made my way to the art room area. The hallway was definitely quieter than the main cafeteria, with just a few round tables scattered around. I spotted Maya at one of them, sitting with Derek and 2 other girls I didn't recognize. She waved me over enthusiastically. The 2 girls were introduced as Sam and Kelsey, and they seemed nice enough, though they kept exchanging these looks I couldn't quite read. We talked about normal stuff at first. Weekend plans, teachers we liked or didn't like, that kind of thing. Then Sam mentioned they were planning to explore this abandoned house on Saturday night. She said it used to belong to some family that just up and left one day, leaving everything behind. The house had been empty for like 3 years now. Maya turned to me with those bright eyes and asked if I wanted to come. She said it would be fun, that they did stuff like this all the time. I hesitated. Back in Texas, I never would have done something like that. But I also never had trouble making friends back in Texas. This felt like a test somehow. Like if I said no, they might not invite me to anything again. So I said yes. Derek finally spoke up then, giving me his number so he could text me the address. His voice was deeper than I expected, and there was something about the way he looked at me when he handed me his phone that felt off. But I pushed that feeling aside. Saturday came faster than I expected. The address Derek sent me was way out on the edge of town, where the houses got farther apart and the streetlights disappeared. My mom thought I was at a movie with my new friends. I felt bad lying to her, but I knew she'd never let me go to an abandoned house at night. I parked about a block away like Derek's text instructed. He said we didn't want to draw attention by having too many cars near the house. The walk to the house was creepy enough on its own. No sidewalks out here, just gravel crunching under my feet and the occasional dog barking in the distance. The house itself looked exactly like you'd expect an abandoned house to look. 2 stories, probably white once, but now just grey and peeling. A front porch with broken spindles on the railing. Windows that were either boarded up or black with dirt. But I didn't see anyone else there yet. I checked my phone. I was right on time, 9 p.m. like we agreed. I texted Derek asking where everyone was. He replied immediately saying they were already inside, to come around to the back door. The backyard was even worse than the front. Overgrown grass that reached my knees. Random pieces of furniture scattered around like someone had thrown them from the windows. The back door was slightly open, hanging crooked on its hinges. I pushed it open and called out for Maya and the others. Derek's voice came from somewhere deeper in the house, telling me to come to the 2nd floor. The inside smelled like mold and something else I couldn't identify. Something sweet but wrong, like fruit that had been rotting for too long. My phone flashlight barely cut through the darkness, just showing me glimpses of empty rooms and hallways. The stairs creaked so loud I was sure they'd break under my weight. Each step felt like it took forever. At the top of the stairs, I saw a light coming from one of the rooms down the hall. Finally, I thought, they must have brought better flashlights. I walked toward the light, still calling out for them. But when I reached the doorway, the room was empty. Just a camping lantern sitting in the middle of the floor, casting weird shadows on the walls. That's when I heard the back door slam shut downstairs. Then footsteps. Not trying to be quiet. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming up the stairs. I called out Maya's name, then Derek's. No answer. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. I could hear breathing now. Not normal breathing. Ragged, excited breathing like someone who'd been running, or someone who was really enjoying this. I backed further into the room, looking for another exit. There was another door on the far wall. I ran for it just as someone appeared in the doorway behind me. I didn't look back to see who it was. The door led to another hallway, this one completely dark. I stumbled forward, using the walls to guide me, my phone flashlight shaking too much to be useful. Behind me, I could hear them following. Not running, just walking. Like they knew I had nowhere to go. I found another staircase, this one narrower, probably servants' stairs or something. I practically fell down them in my rush to get away. At the bottom, I saw moonlight coming through a window. The window was painted shut, but I didn't care. I grabbed a piece of broken furniture and smashed through the glass. The cuts on my hands didn't even register as I pulled myself through. I heard them coming down the stairs as I dropped to the ground outside. Then I ran. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life. Through the overgrown yard, over a fence, through someone else's property. Dogs started barking everywhere, but I didn't stop. I didn't stop until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so bad it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. 4 figures stood at the end of the street, just watching, just standing there in a line, not moving. I called in sick to school Monday and Tuesday. On Wednesday, my mom made me go. I spent the entire day looking over my shoulder, avoiding the art room hallway, eating lunch in a bathroom stall. I never saw Maya or her friends again. When I finally worked up the courage to ask another student about them, she looked at me confused. She said there was no Maya in our chemistry class. No Derek either. She said those desks had been empty all semester. I checked the yearbook from last year in the library. I found them. Maya Chen, Derek Washington, Sam Oliver, and Kelsey Brown. But under their photos, there was a memorial page. All 4 of them had died in a car accident 3 years ago. On the same night I went to that house. October 15th. The librarian saw me staring at the page and came over. She said it was tragic, how they died coming back from exploring that same abandoned house. She said people claimed to see them around school sometimes, especially near the art room where they used to eat lunch, always trying to make new friends. I transferred schools again the next month. I told my parents I was being bullied, and they didn't question it. Sometimes I wonder if I really saw what I think I saw. But then I remember those 4 figures standing in the street, watching me drive away. And I remember the cuts on my hands from the window glass. The scars are still there. They're real, which means it was all real. The night shift. Getting a job at 17 wasn't exactly my idea. But my parents insisted I needed to learn responsibility, save for college, all that typical parent stuff. So when I saw the posting for a night custodian at my old middle school, I figured why not. The pay was actually pretty good, way better than minimum wage at some fast food place. And I'd be working alone, which honestly sounded perfect. No annoying co-workers, no customers yelling at me, just me and my headphones cleaning empty classrooms. The interview was weird though. Mr. Harrison, the head of maintenance, kept asking me strange questions. Was I afraid of the dark? How did I handle being alone? Did I believe in leaving the past in the past? That last one really threw me off, but I just nodded and said yes to everything. I needed the job. He hired me on the spot, which should have been my first red flag. He said I'd be working Friday and Saturday nights, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The school would be completely empty except for me. He gave me a ring of keys that must have weighed 5 pounds and a list of duties that seemed pretty straightforward. Empty trash, mop floors, clean bathrooms, check that all doors were locked. Simple enough. My first night was a Friday in November. The parking lot was completely empty when I arrived, just my beat-up Honda sitting under a streetlight. The main entrance was lit up, but everything else was dark. I used the key Mr. Harrison had marked with red tape to get in. The silence hit me immediately. Schools aren't supposed to be this quiet. During the day, even when classes were in session, there was always some kind of noise. But now, nothing. Just the hum of the fluorescent lights I turned on as I went. I started with the first floor, going room by room. It was actually kind of nostalgic, being back in my old middle school, room 104, where I had English with Mrs. Peterson, room 108, where I failed my first math test, the cafeteria where I asked Jenny Murphy to the 8th grade dance, and she said no in front of everyone. Good times. The work was mindless, which was perfect. I put in my earbuds and got into a rhythm. Spray, wipe, trash, mop, move on. By midnight, I had finished the first floor and started on the second. That's when things got weird. I was in room 212, what used to be the science lab, when I heard something over my music, like a door closing somewhere down the hall. I pulled out my earbuds and listened. Nothing. Old buildings make noise, I told myself. Pipes expanding and contracting, wind rattling windows, whatever. I put my earbuds back in and kept working, but I turned the volume down a bit. Around 1 a.m., I was cleaning the second floor bathrooms when I heard it again. This time it was definitely a door. And it was definitely on this floor. I walked out into the hallway and looked both ways. All the classroom doors were closed, just like I'd left them, but at the far end of the hall, the door to the stairwell was open. I knew I hadn't opened it. I'd been using the stairs at the other end of the building. I walked down there slowly, telling myself it was probably just a draft or something. The stairwell was pitch black. I felt around for the light switch, but couldn't find it. My phone flashlight showed empty stairs going up and down. I closed the door firmly and made sure it latched. Then I went back to work, but I kept my earbuds out now. By 2 a.m., I was getting genuinely freaked out. Little things kept happening. A water fountain turned on by itself for a few seconds. A locker slammed shut even though I was nowhere near the lockers. And every time I finished cleaning a room and moved on to the next one, I could swear I heard footsteps in the room I'd just left. I decided to take my break early. Mr. Harrison had shown me a small break room in the basement where the day custodians usually hung out. It had a coffee maker and a microwave, and most importantly, it had a door that locked from the inside. The basement was even creepier than the upper floors. Half the lights didn't work, so there were these pools of darkness between the functioning fixtures. The break room was at the far end, past the boiler room and some storage areas. I practically ran to it and locked myself in. The coffee was old, but I didn't care. I needed the caffeine and the warmth. I sat there for 30 minutes, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. It was my first night. I was alone in a big empty building. Of course my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I opened the door to go back to work, someone had written something on the wall across from the break room, in what looked like black marker, in neat block letters. "You shouldn't be here after midnight." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I looked around, but the basement hallway was empty. Just those pools of darkness between the lights. I ran back upstairs and seriously considered just leaving. But I needed this job. And what was I going to tell Mr. Harrison? That someone wrote on the wall and I got scared? So I kept working, but I stayed on the first floor where there were more windows, more exits. At 3 a.m., I was mopping the main hallway when all the lights went out at once. Not like a power failure where they flicker and die. Just instant, complete darkness. I stood there frozen, holding the mop handle like a weapon. Then I heard them. Footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps, coming from different directions. Some from upstairs, some from the basement stairs, some from the hallway behind me. All converging on where I stood. I dropped the mop and ran for the main entrance. But when I got there, the doors wouldn't open. I had the keys, but my hands were shaking too much to find the right one in the darkness. The footsteps were getting closer, and now I could hear breathing. Multiple people breathing, some laughing quietly. I gave up on the keys and ran for the windows instead. They were the kind with wire mesh in the glass, but I didn't care. I picked up a chair and smashed it against the window over and over until the glass started to crack. The footsteps were right behind me now. I could feel someone standing there, feel their breath on my neck. Just as a hand touched my shoulder, the lights came back on. I spun around. Nobody was there. The hallway was empty. But on the floor where I'd dropped my mop, someone had arranged the cleaning supplies to spell out, "Last warning." I left everything exactly where it was and walked out through the main entrance. The doors opened easily now. I sat in my car until 6 a.m., my official end time, then texted Mr. Harrison that I quit. He replied immediately, even though it was barely dawn. All he said was, "They usually last longer than one night." I found out later from a friend who worked in the school district office that they'd been trying to fill that night custodian position for 2 years. Nobody ever lasted more than a week, and the few who stayed longer than one night all reported the same things. Footsteps, doors opening and closing, messages appearing on walls. And always, everything got worse after midnight. My friend also told me something else. Something that Mr. Harrison hadn't mentioned in the interview. 20 years ago, a custodian named James Walsh was working the night shift when he surprised some kids who'd broken in to vandalize the school. They attacked him, left him for dead in the basement. He wasn't found until Monday morning. The kids were never caught. James Walsh died at 3:17 a.m., according to the coroner's report. The exact time those footsteps started converging on me in the darkness. I still drive past that school, sometimes on my way to my current job at a nice, well-lit grocery store. The night custodian position is still posted on their website. It's been 3 years now. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed that night. If I hadn't run. But then I remember the feeling of that hand on my shoulder, cold even through my shirt. And I remember what my friend told me about the last custodian who stayed past 3:17 a.m. They found him in the morning, locked in the supply closet in the basement. He was alive, but he wouldn't stop screaming about the people in the darkness. He's still in psychiatric care. He still won't go anywhere alone. And he still won't talk about what he saw after the lights came back on. The study group. College was supposed to be different. That's what everyone kept telling me. You'll find your people, they said. You'll finally fit in. But 2 months into freshman year at State University, I was lonelier than I'd ever been in high school. Living in the dorms made it worse somehow. Being surrounded by people having fun, making friends, living their best lives while I sat in my room pretending to be too busy studying to go out. My roommate had basically moved into his girlfriend's room, so I had the place to myself most nights. Which was fine, I told myself. More quiet for studying. Organic chemistry was kicking my ass though. I'd always been good at science in high school, but this was different. The professor, Dr. Klein, seemed to take pleasure in how many students were failing. He actually smiled when he announced that the class average on the midterm was 47%. I got a 52%, which was somehow supposed to make me feel better. That's when Lindsay approached me after class. She sat 2 rows ahead of me, and I'd noticed her mainly because she was one of the few people who seemed to understand what was going on. She always had the right answers when Dr. Klein called on her. She asked if I wanted to join her study group. She said they met 3 times a week in one of the old study rooms in the basement of the library. The ones nobody used because they didn't have windows and the Wi-Fi barely worked down there. But that meant they were always available and quiet. I said yes immediately. She smiled and gave me her number, telling me to text her for the details. The first meeting was on a Wednesday night at 8 p.m. The basement of the library was exactly as depressing as expected. Fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered, carpet that might have been green once but was now just sort of grey, and that weird smell that old buildings get, like dust and mold and something else you can't identify. I found room B12 at the end of a long hallway. Lindsay was already there with 3 other people. She introduced them as Marcus, Ashley, and Tom. They all seemed normal enough, maybe a little intense about studying, but that's what I needed. We worked for 3 hours straight that first night. They were all really helpful, especially Marcus, who had apparently taken organic chemistry last year and failed, so he was retaking it. He had all his old notes and practice tests that Dr. Klein reused every year. It was exactly what I needed. By the end of the night, I actually understood the material for the first time all semester. We agreed to meet again on Friday. The second meeting was even better. Ashley brought snacks. Tom had found some great YouTube videos that explained things way better than Dr. Klein, and Lindsay helped me work through problems I'd been stuck on for weeks. For the first time since starting college, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The third meeting was different. It was the following Monday, and when I got to B12, they were all already there, sitting in a circle on the floor instead of at the table. Lindsay said they wanted to try something different tonight, a study technique that Marcus had learned about. She said it was like a memory palace thing, but more intense, more effective. I should have left then, but they were all looking at me expectantly, and these were the only friends I'd made so far. So I sat down in the circle. Marcus lit some candles, which seemed weird, but he said it helped with concentration. The fluorescent lights were giving him headaches anyway. Then Lindsay started talking in this low, rhythmic voice. She was saying something about opening our minds, about removing barriers to learning. It sounded like meditation stuff, which I'd never been into, but I played along. Tom and Ashley had their eyes closed, so I closed mine too. Lindsay's voice kept going, getting softer and softer until I could barely hear her. Then I must have dozed off or something, because the next thing I knew, I was standing in a hallway I didn't recognize. It looked like the library basement, but different. The walls were closer together, the ceiling was lower, and instead of fluorescent lights, there were old-fashioned fixtures with actual bulbs. And it was cold. So cold I could see my breath. I called out for Lindsay and the others, but my voice echoed strangely, like the hallway went on forever. I started walking, looking for stairs or an exit or anything familiar. Every door I tried was locked, and behind some of them I could hear things, whispers, scratching, and once, what sounded like someone crying. Then I saw Marcus at the far end of the hallway, but when he turned around, his face was wrong. His eyes were completely black, no whites at all. He smiled at me, and his teeth were too sharp, too many of them. He started walking toward me, not quickly but steadily, inevitably. I ran. I ran through hallways that shouldn't exist, down stairs that went up instead of down, through rooms that connected in impossible ways. And everywhere I went, I could hear them following, all 4 of them, calling my name in voices that weren't quite right. Finally, I found a door that opened. It led to a room full of filing cabinets, stretching as far as I could see. Each cabinet had a small label with a name and dates, birth dates and death dates. I recognized some of the names. Students from the university. Some of the death dates were in the future. Then I found my own name. My birth date was correct. The death date was that night's date. That's when Lindsay appeared beside me. Not the wrong version, but looking normal, looking concerned. She said I'd had a reaction to the meditation, that sometimes people with anxiety had bad trips. She was holding my hand, leading me back through normal hallways, back to room B12. The others were packing up their stuff, looking worried. Tom said I'd been unresponsive for almost an hour. They wanted to call campus security, but Lindsay had insisted I'd be fine. I mumbled something about feeling sick and left. But as I walked back to my dorm, things kept being wrong. Street signs had different names. Buildings were in the wrong places. And everyone I passed seemed to be watching me. When I got to my room, my roommate was there. But he introduced himself like we'd never met. Said he'd just transferred in, was hoping we'd get along. I locked myself in the bathroom and called my mom. But the woman who answered wasn't my mom. She said I had the wrong number, but she said it in my mom's voice. I stayed in that bathroom for hours, afraid to come out, afraid to see what else had changed. Finally, exhaustion won and I went to bed. When I woke up, everything was normal again. My roommate recognized me, my mom's number worked, the buildings were where they should be. But room B12 in the library basement didn't exist. There was no B12. The numbering went from B11 to B13. Lindsay wasn't in my organic chemistry class anymore. Neither were Marcus, Ashley, or Tom. When I checked the student directory, they weren't listed. When I asked other students about them, nobody knew who I was talking about. But I still had the text messages from Lindsay on my phone. Except now they were from an unknown number, and when I tried to call it, it was disconnected. I ended up dropping organic chemistry, switching to a business major. Nothing that required late-night study sessions in basement rooms. But sometimes, usually when I'm stressed about exams, I dream about that endless hallway, about the filing cabinets with the names and dates, and I wake up convinced that I'm still there, still trapped in whatever place they sent me to, that this normal life is the dream, and the nightmare is what's real. The worst part is the filing cabinet I saw with my name. The death date keeps changing in my memory. Sometimes it's years in the future. Sometimes it's tomorrow. Sometimes it's yesterday, and I wonder if I'm already dead and just don't know it yet. I graduate next year. If I make it that long, if this is even real, if I ever actually left room B12, the substitute teacher. Senior year was supposed to be easy. Coast through the last semester, graduate, get out of this small town forever. I'd already been accepted to college, so my grades didn't really matter anymore as long as I didn't completely fail anything. That's why I was taking creative writing as one of my electives. Easy A. Just write some stories and poems. Pretend to care about metaphors and symbolism. Mrs. Chen usually taught it. This sweet older lady who gave everyone good grades as long as they turned something in. But when I walked into class that Monday in February, it wasn't Mrs. Chen at the desk. It was a man I'd never seen before. He was probably in his 30s, wearing a blazer that didn't quite fit right and glasses that looked like they came from the 1980s. When he smiled, only half his face moved. He introduced himself as Mr. Garrett, said Mrs. Chan had a family emergency and he'd be taking over for the next few weeks. Something about the way he said family emergency made it sound like he was lying, or like he knew something we didn't. The first few days were normal enough. He had us do writing prompts, peer reviews, the usual stuff. But his prompts were weird. Instead of write about your summer vacation, or describe your favorite place, He had us write about things like, describe the last dream you can't quite remember. Write about someone you used to know but don't anymore. Tell me about the room in your house you don't go into. And when we shared our work, he'd ask these really specific follow-up questions. Like when Jennifer wrote about her grandmother's attic, he wanted to know exact measurements, where the windows faced, if there were any mirrors up there. When Mike wrote about a recurring nightmare, Mr. Garrett asked him to draw a map of the place where it happened. But the really weird stuff started the second week. He assigned us partners for a collaborative story project. But instead of letting us choose or going alphabetically, he paired people up in this specific way that seemed random but felt deliberate. I got paired with Sophia, this quiet girl who always sat in the back and never talked to anyone. Our assignment was to write a story together about parallel lives. We had to meet outside of class to work on it. Sophia suggested we meet at her house because her parents worked late. She lived in this old Victorian place on the edge of town, the kind that people always said was haunted but probably wasn't. Just old and creaky. Her room was exactly what you'd expect from a quiet girl who wore all black. Band posters, candles, lots of books about witchcraft and the occult. I didn't judge. Everyone needs a phase. We started working on our story, passing a notebook back and forth, each writing a paragraph, then handing it over. It was actually kind of fun at first. The story was about two versions of the same person living in parallel dimensions, and how they slowly became aware of each other. But as we wrote, the story got darker without us meaning to. The parallel versions started trying to communicate, then trying to switch places. Then one tried to kill the other. We didn't plan any of this. It just happened, like the story was writing itself. After about 2 hours, Sophia suddenly stopped mid-sentence. She was staring at what she'd just written, looking confused. She showed me the notebook. The handwriting had changed. It was still her hand holding the pen, but the writing looked different, older somehow, more angular. And the words were describing my house. Perfectly. Down to the crack in my bedroom ceiling, and the way my door doesn't quite close all the way. Things Sophia couldn't possibly know. We both tried to laugh it off, but I could tell she was as freaked out as I was. We decided to call it a night. But as I was leaving, she grabbed my arm. She said Mr. Garrett had given her a different assignment, a solo project. He'd told her not to mention it to anyone, but she was scared. The assignment was to write about the person who wasn't supposed to exist, and he'd given her a photograph to base it on. She showed me the photo. It was me, but not a recent picture. It looked old, like from the 1970s or something, and I was wearing clothes I didn't own, standing in front of a house I'd never seen. But it was definitely my face. I took the photo and left without saying anything. I didn't know what to say. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at the photo, trying to figure out how it was possible. Digital manipulation maybe, but it looked genuinely old. The paper was yellowed and creased. The next day, in creative writing, Mr. Garrett asked me to stay after class. He said Sophia had told him about our story, about how well it was coming along. But Sophia wasn't in class that day. He said she'd moved. Suddenly. Family decision. I asked for her number or email to finish our project, but he said he didn't have that information. Then he handed me a notebook. He said it was Sophia's part of the story, that she'd dropped it off for me. But when I opened it, every page was blank except the last one, written in that same angular handwriting from the night before. Stop looking for answers. Some people aren't meant to exist in the same place. The photo was a warning. Mr. Garrett isn't what he seems. And neither are you. I tried to find Sophia after that. Her house was empty. For sale sign in the yard. The realtor said it had been empty for months. No one at school remembered her except me. Her name wasn't in the yearbook from previous years. It was like she'd never existed. Mr. Garrett finished out the semester. 3 more students moved away suddenly during that time. Each time, he had a perfectly reasonable explanation. Each time, no one else seemed to remember them clearly. On the last day of class, he asked me to stay after again. He said I'd done excellent work, that I had real potential, that he'd be watching my future with great interest. Then he handed me back our story, mine and Sophia's. Except now it was complete. And the ending. The ending was about how one version finally succeeded in taking the other's place. How they learned to exist in a world that wasn't quite theirs. How they had to be careful, because there were people who could tell. People like Mr. Garrett. People whose job it was to find the ones who didn't belong and send them back. Or somewhere else. Somewhere worse. I never saw Mr. Garrett after that day. When school started the next fall, Mrs. Chen was back. She said she'd never been gone, that she'd taught creative writing all through the previous semester. No one else remembered Mr. Garrett. But I still have that photo, the one of me in the 1970s. And sometimes, when I look in mirrors, I swear my reflection moves a split second after I do, like it's trying to keep up. Like it's learning to be me, or like I'm learning to be it. I don't take creative writing anymore. I don't write stories. And I definitely don't look at old photos, because sometimes, in the background of family albums or yearbooks or random pictures online, I see him, Mr. Garrett, standing in the distance, watching, always watching, and getting closer. The exchange student. Being an exchange student from Brazil was already hard enough without everything that happened at Riverside High. I'd been placed with a host family in this small town in Ohio, and they were nice enough, but they worked all the time, so I was alone a lot. My English was pretty good, but not perfect, and sometimes I missed things in conversation that made me look stupid. The first day of school was overwhelming, everyone talking so fast, using slang I didn't understand, making references to TV shows and movies I'd never seen. I sat alone at lunch for 3 days straight, pretending to be really interested in my phone even though I had no one to text. On Thursday, these 3 kids approached my table and asked if they could sit with me. They introduced themselves as Connor, Madison, and Tyler, all juniors like me. Connor was the one who did most of the talking, said they knew how hard it was being new, especially from another country. He said his family had hosted exchange students before, so he understood what I was going through. Madison kept smiling at me in this really intense way, like she was trying to memorize my face. Tyler didn't say much, just sat there drawing in a notebook, but occasionally he'd look up at me with these pale blue eyes that seemed to go right through me. They invited me to hang out after school, said they wanted to show me around town, help me feel more at home. I was so desperate for friends that I said yes immediately, didn't even think about how weird it was that they'd suddenly decided to befriend me. After school, Connor said his car was broken, so we'd have to walk to where they wanted to take me. We walked for maybe 20 minutes, leaving the main part of town and heading toward this industrial area full of old warehouses. Madison kept asking me questions about Brazil, but they were strange questions. Did I have any siblings? Would my family come looking for me if something happened? How often did I contact home? I thought maybe she was just awkward at conversation. English wasn't my first language, so who was I to judge? Tyler finally spoke up when we reached this abandoned factory building, said this was where all the cool kids hung out. But there were no cars, no other teenagers, no signs of life at all. Just broken windows and walls covered in graffiti that looked like it had been there for years. Connor led us inside through a gap in the fence, and the place smelled like rust and something else, something organic and wrong. We went deeper into the building, through rooms with broken machinery and floors covered in glass and debris. Finally, we reached this big open space that used to be the main factory floor. There were mattresses on the ground, old and stained, and the walls were covered in photos. Hundreds of photos of teenagers, all different ages and ethnicities, some looking recent and others clearly from decades ago. That's when I noticed that some of the photos were of other exchange students I'd heard about. Kids from previous years who'd supposedly gone home early or transferred to different programs. Madison saw me looking and laughed, said they liked to collect memories of all their special friends. Connor moved between me and the exit, still smiling, but now it looked predatory. He said exchange students were perfect because no one really kept track of them. The host families assumed they were at school. The school assumed they were with host families, and their real families were thousands of miles away. Tyler had stopped drawing and was now pulling something out of his backpack. It was a length of rope, and he was tying these complicated knots in it like he'd done this before. I pretended I didn't understand what was happening, started speaking rapidly in Portuguese like I was confused. It made them pause for a second, and Connor started explaining slower, like the problem was the language barrier. That's when I ran. I pushed past Madison and sprinted toward where I thought the exit was. I could hear them behind me, not running but walking, calling out that there was nowhere to go. The building was a maze, and I kept hitting dead ends, having to backtrack while their voices got closer. I found a broken window on the second floor and didn't even hesitate. I jumped through it, landing hard on a pile of old wooden pallets that broke my fall but cut my hands and legs. I ran all the way back to town, blood dripping from the cuts, people staring as I passed. When I got to my host family's house, I told them everything. But when they called the school, the administration said there were no students named Connor, Madison, or Tyler. They checked the yearbook, the enrollment records, everything. Those kids didn't exist. My host family thought I was having adjustment issues, maybe hallucinating from stress. They wanted to send me to a counselor, but I convinced them I was fine, that I'd just gotten confused. But I knew what I'd seen was real. The cuts on my body were real. The photos on that wall were real. I started researching missing exchange students from the area. Over the past 10 years, 15 had supposedly gone home early for various reasons. Family emergencies, homesickness, academic problems. But when I tried to find them on social media, they'd all disappeared completely. No Facebook, no Instagram, nothing after they left Riverside. I only had 3 more months in the program, and I spent them terrified. I never walked anywhere alone, always stayed in crowded places, never deviated from my routine. Sometimes I'd see them though, Connor, Madison, and Tyler, standing across the street from school, sitting in a car in the parking lot, following me at a distance when I walked to the store, always watching, always waiting for me to be alone again. The day before I flew home, I found a note in my locker. It was in Portuguese, which meant one of them had taken the time to translate it. It said, "We'll remember you, and we'll be waiting for the next one." When I got back to Brazil, I tried to warn the exchange program about Riverside High, but they said it was one of their most successful partnerships, that students always had wonderful experiences there. They showed me testimonials from previous students, all positive, but I recognized some of the names. They were the kids from the photos on the wall, the ones who'd supposedly gone home early. Someone was writing fake testimonials for kids who never made it home. I'm in college now, safe in Sao Paulo, thousands of miles from Ohio. But sometimes I check the Riverside High Exchange Program website. They're still accepting students, still promising a life-changing experience in small-town America. And every year, 1 or 2 students come home early. Family emergencies, they say. Adjustment issues. Homesickness. But I know better. I know they're in that factory, on that wall, part of someone's collection. And Connor, Madison, and Tyler are still out there, waiting for the next exchange student. The next kid with no local connections. The next perfect victim. The assistant coach. I joined track team sophomore year because I needed an extracurricular for college applications, and running seemed like something I could do without much skill. Just put one foot in front of the other, right? Coach Peterson ran the team, but he had an assistant coach who helped with the distance runners specifically. Mr. Wolf was probably 25, said he'd run track at State University and wanted to give back to the sport. He was good-looking in that athletic way, and half the girls on the team had crushes on him. He paid special attention to the newer runners, said we had the most potential because we hadn't developed bad habits yet. He offered to do extra training sessions on weekends for anyone who wanted to seriously improve their times. I was slow, really slow, so I figured I needed all the help I could get. 5 of us showed up that first Saturday morning at 6 a.m. The school track was still dark, just the parking lot lights giving us enough visibility to see. Mr. Wolf had us warm up with stretches that seemed different from what Coach Peterson taught. They were more intimate somehow, requiring him to adjust our positions with his hands. He spent extra time on me, said my form needed the most work. His hands would linger on my hips, my shoulders, the small of my back, always just a second too long. We did our run, 5 miles through the neighborhoods around school. Mr. Wolf ran behind us, said he was watching our form, but it felt like he was herding us. When we got back, the other kids left pretty quickly, but Mr. Wolf asked me to stay. He said he saw real potential in me, that with extra work I could be varsity by junior year. He offered to train me personally, one-on-one sessions before the group practice. That meant meeting at 5 a.m., but I was desperate to be good at something, so I agreed. The first few sessions were actually helpful. My times were improving, my endurance was better, and Mr. Wolf seemed genuinely invested in my progress. But then things started getting weird. He'd suggest we run routes that took us far from school, through wooded trails where no one else went. He'd run right behind me, so close I could feel his breath on my neck. When we'd stop for water breaks, he'd make comments about how I was developing, how my body was getting stronger. The way he said it made me uncomfortable, but I told myself I was overreacting. One morning, about a month into our training, he said we were going to work on mental toughness. He drove us to this nature preserve about 20 minutes from school. I should have questioned why we needed to drive somewhere, but I trusted him. The trail he chose was completely deserted, probably 5 miles from the nearest road. About 2 miles in, he stopped suddenly and said we needed to talk about my commitment. He said he'd been putting in all this extra time with me, and I needed to show I appreciated it. He moved closer, backing me against a tree, and I could smell his sweat and something else, something chemical like he'd taken something. His eyes were dilated even though the sun was barely up, and his hands were shaking. He reached for me, and I ducked under his arm and ran. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life. Could hear him behind me for the first mile, but then his footsteps faded. I didn't know where I was going, just followed the trail until it connected to a road. A woman walking her dog let me use her phone to call my parents. When I told them what happened, they called the police immediately. But when the cops went to arrest Mr. Wolf, The school said there was no assistant coach by that name. Coach Peterson said he'd never had an assistant, had been coaching alone for 15 years. The other kids who'd been at those Saturday practices claimed they didn't know what I was talking about. They said they'd never seen Mr. Wolf, never attended extra practices. Even though I had texts from them talking about how hot Mr. Wolf was, how lucky I was to get one-on-one time with him. But when I showed my parents the texts, the numbers were disconnected. The messages were from unknown senders. The police said without evidence of a crime or even proof this person existed, there was nothing they could do. My parents pulled me out of track, but I still saw him sometimes. At the grocery store, at the mall, always at a distance, always watching. I found out later that 3 girls from track had quit suddenly over the previous 2 years. All distance runners, all had been improving rapidly. All cited personal reasons for leaving. One of them, Jessica, had transferred schools entirely. I found her on social media and messaged her. She knew exactly who Mr. Wolf was. She said he'd done the same thing to her. The private training, the isolated routes, the morning in the woods. But she'd given in when he cornered her, too scared to run. She said he'd told her afterward that no one would believe her, that he didn't technically exist, that he could do whatever he wanted because he was no one. She'd tried to report it, but got the same response I did. No record of him, no evidence, no crime. We compared notes and figured out he showed up every few years, always with a different name, always as an assistant coach for a different sport, always targeting the new kids, the slow kids, the ones desperate to improve. I graduated and moved away for college, but I still check my old high school's website sometimes. Last month, they posted about their new assistant swimming coach. Young guy, former college athlete, wants to give back to the sport. The photo is blurry, but I recognize the eyes. Same predator, different sport, new hunting ground. I tried to warn them, but who's going to believe me? I'm just a former student with a history of making accusations about coaches who don't exist. But he does exist. He's real, and he's still out there, offering extra training to desperate kids, still taking them to isolated places, still getting away with it because officially he's no one. The school newspaper meeting. I joined the school newspaper junior year because I needed something that looked good on college applications but didn't require athletic ability. Writing came naturally to me, and I figured covering basketball games and pep rallies would be easy enough. The newspaper staff met every Tuesday after school in room 203, usually about 8 of us plus our advisor, Mrs. Chen. But one Tuesday in October, Mrs. Chen was sick and had arranged for a substitute advisor to run the meeting. When I got to room 203, there was a younger woman there, maybe mid-20s, with long black hair and clothes that seemed too formal for a high school. She introduced herself as Ms. Gray and said she was a freelance journalist who sometimes helped with student publications. There were only 4 of us at the meeting that day. The others were at various sports practices or had called in sick. Ms. Gray said this was actually perfect because she wanted to work on investigative journalism with a smaller group. She said the best stories were the ones adults didn't want us to tell, the secrets hidden in our own school. She pulled out a manila folder full of old newspaper clippings and photographs. They were all about our school, but from different decades, going back to when it was built in 1952. Each article was about a student who'd gone missing or died under strange circumstances. A girl who'd disappeared from the library in 1967. A boy found dead in the boiler room in 1975. 3 students who'd vanished during a field trip in 1983. Ms. Gray said these weren't random tragedies, but a pattern. Every 7 to 10 years, something happened at our school. Something the administration covered up. She wanted us to investigate and write an exposé that would finally reveal the truth. The other students seemed excited, but something about Ms. Gray bothered me. The way she moved was too fluid, like she was gliding instead of walking, and her eyes never blinked, not once during the entire presentation. She divided us into pairs and assigned each team a different incident to research. My partner was Kevin, this quiet kid who usually just did layout and never wrote articles. We were assigned the most recent case, a student named Rachel who'd supposedly transferred schools suddenly in 2016. Ms. Gray gave us Rachel's last known address and said we should start by interviewing neighbors. She said real journalists didn't wait for permission. They went out and found the truth. Kevin and I exchanged uncertain looks, but agreed to meet after school the next day. But that night, I did my own research on Ms. Gray. I couldn't find any freelance journalist by that name in our state. No LinkedIn, no published articles, no professional website. But I did find something else. A student named Jennifer Gray who'd attended our school in 1994. She'd been editor of the school newspaper. She'd disappeared while investigating a story about missing students. Her body was never found. The photo in the yearbook looked exactly like Ms. Gray, just with 90s hair and clothes. Same face, same intense eyes, same unsettling smile. I texted Kevin immediately, but he didn't respond. The next morning, Kevin wasn't in school. His parents had called saying he was sick, but when I talked to his best friend, he said Kevin had been fine the night before. I decided to go to room 203 during lunch to look for clues. The room was empty, but on the board was a message in handwriting I recognized as Ms. Gray's. The truth requires sacrifice. One journalist's disappearance is another's story. See you Tuesday. I went to Mrs. Chen, who was back from being sick, and asked about Ms. Gray. She looked confused and said she'd never arranged for a substitute. She'd cancelled Tuesday's meeting when she called in sick. There had been no newspaper meeting that day, but I had notes from the meeting. I had the folder Ms. Gray had given us. I had the assignment she'd written down. Mrs. Chen went pale when she saw the materials. She recognized them. They were from the newspaper archives, but they were supposed to be locked in the storage room that no one had the key to anymore. We went to check the storage room, and the door was wide open. Inside, filing cabinets had been ransacked, and there was a wall covered in photos and articles connected by red string. It was an investigation board, mapping out all the disappearances over 70 years. And in the center was a new photo. Kevin's school ID picture with yesterday's date written underneath. I never saw Kevin again. His parents said he'd run away, but I knew better. The next Tuesday, I didn't go to newspaper meeting, but I walked past room 203 and looked through the window. Ms. Gray was there with 3 new students I didn't recognize. She was showing them the same folder, telling them the same story about investigating the truth. When she saw me watching, she smiled and waved. Then she pointed at the board where she'd written, "Next meeting, field trip to uncover the truth. Don't tell anyone." I tried to warn those students later, but they said they'd never been to a newspaper meeting. They didn't know any Ms. Gray. They looked at me like I was crazy. 2 weeks later, all 3 of them were absent. Their parents said they'd transferred schools, moved away, various excuses. But I knew they'd gone on that field trip. The field trip to join Kevin and Rachel and Jennifer and all the others. The ones who'd dug too deep into the school's secrets. The ones who'd followed Ms. Gray to find the truth. The ones who became the story. The school newspaper still meets every Tuesday in room 203. Mrs. Chen is still the advisor, but sometimes when she's sick, a substitute appears. A young woman with long black hair who wants to teach students about investigative journalism. who has a folder full of old articles about missing students, who needs volunteers to uncover the truth. And there are always volunteers, always students eager for a good story, always kids who don't check if the substitute is real, always next week's disappearances waiting to happen. The gym teachers' special training. PE was mandatory all 4 years at Jefferson High, which sucked for those of us who weren't athletic. Senior year, I thought I could coast through with minimal effort since colleges had already accepted me. But we got a new gym teacher that year, Coach Brennan, who transferred from some school in Texas. He was probably 30, built like a Marine, and had this intensity that made everyone uncomfortable. He said he was going to whip us into shape, that too many kids these days were soft and weak. The first few weeks were just brutal workouts that left everyone exhausted and sore. But then he started selecting certain students for what he called advanced physical training. It wasn't optional. If he selected you, you had to attend these sessions every Thursday after school or fail PE. I was one of the unlucky 8 chosen, along with kids who were either overweight, had asthma, or were just generally bad at sports. The weak ones, as he called us when he thought we couldn't hear. The first session was in the old gymnasium, the one they'd closed after building the new sports complex. It still smelled like decades of sweat and rubber, and half the lights didn't work. Coach Brennan had us line up against the wall and take off our shirts so he could assess our physical conditions. He walked down the line making comments about our bodies, pointing out every flaw, every weakness. When he got to me, he grabbed my arm and squeezed, testing the muscle. He said I was pathetic, that my generation had forgotten what it meant to be strong, that he was going to fix us whether we liked it or not. The exercises he had us do weren't normal PE stuff. They were military-style punishment drills that left us gasping and sometimes crying. If anyone complained or asked for water, he'd make the whole group start over. He'd stand over us while we did push-ups, sometimes putting his foot on our backs to make it harder. During planks, he'd walk on our backs, saying we needed to learn to handle pressure. One kid, Marcus, threw up during the second session from exhaustion. Coach Brennan made him clean it up with his shirt and continue exercising shirtless. When Marcus's parents complained, the administration said Coach Brennan was using approved training methods. By the 4th session, only 5 of us were still coming. The others had gotten doctor's notes or transferred to different PE periods. Coach Brennan said we were the committed ones, the ones who would be transformed. That Thursday, he took us to a different location. The basement under the old gym that was supposed to be just storage. But he'd set up equipment down there, weird stuff that looked homemade. Metal frames with straps, weighted devices I couldn't identify, things that looked more like torture equipment than exercise machines. He said this was where real training happened, where he'd trained when he was our age, where his coach had made him into a man. He strapped Jenny, this small sophomore girl, into one of the devices. It held her arms and legs in place while he attached weights that pulled in different directions. She started crying immediately, saying it hurt, but he said pain was just weakness leaving the body. That's when I noticed the stains on the concrete floor. Dark, rust-colored stains in patterns that suggested something had been spilled repeatedly. And on the walls, there were scratches like someone had tried to claw their way out. I said I needed to use the bathroom and tried to leave, but the door we'd come through was locked. Coach Brennan smiled and said no one left until training was complete. That's when his face started to change. Not dramatically, but subtly. His features seemed to shift, becoming older, more cruel. His eyes went from brown to almost yellow, and his teeth looked sharper. He said we were going to play a game. The weakest person would stay for extra training, while the others could go. But we had to choose who was weakest. We had to vote. Everyone immediately looked at Jenny, still strapped in the device, crying and pleading. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave her there with whatever Coach Brennan really was. I said I was the weakest, that I'd stay. Coach Brennan laughed, this horrible sound that echoed off the concrete walls. He said I was lying, that we all knew Jenny was the weakest. But he appreciated my sacrifice, so he'd make a deal. If I could complete one final exercise, we could all go. The exercise was simple. Hold a plank position for 5 minutes while he placed weights on my back. Every 30 seconds, he'd add more weight. If I collapsed, Jenny stayed. If I held it, we all went free. I've never experienced pain like that. By minute 3, I thought my spine would snap. By minute 4, I was screaming through gritted teeth. But I could see Jenny's terrified face, and I held on. When the 5 minutes ended, I collapsed completely, couldn't move for several minutes. Coach Brennan seemed disappointed, but kept his word. The door unlocked, and we all ran out of there. I went straight to the principal the next morning, showed him the bruises on my back from the weights. But when he called Coach Brennan in, it was a different person. Similar looking, but older, softer, with a completely different demeanor. This Coach Brennan said he'd never held after-school training sessions. He showed documentation proving he'd been at district meetings every Thursday when we claimed the training happened. The old gym was checked, but the basement door was welded shut. Had been for years, they said. No way anyone could have gotten in. The other kids from the training started denying it happened. One by one, they said I was making it up, that I was trying to get out of PE. Even Jenny, who I'd saved, said she didn't know what I was talking about. But I could see it in her eyes. The fear, the threat. Whatever Coach Brennan was, he'd gotten to them, made them understand what would happen if they talked. I was labeled a troublemaker, a liar seeking attention. My parents were embarrassed, made me apologize to Coach Brennan publicly. But sometimes, when I passed him in the hall, his face would flicker. For just a second, I'd see the other version. The one with yellow eyes and sharp teeth. The one who'd smile at me like he was waiting for another chance. I graduated and got out of there, but I still have nightmares about that basement. About what would have happened if I'd collapsed during the plank. About what Coach Brennan really does with the weak ones. My little brother starts at Jefferson High next year. He's small for his age, has asthma, the exact type Coach Brennan would select. I've begged my parents to send him somewhere else, but they think I'm still traumatized from my breakdown senior year. They don't understand that Coach Brennan is still there, still selecting the weak ones, still taking them to basements that don't officially exist, still transforming them in ways that no one wants to understand. And every year, a few students quit PE, transfer schools, disappear, while Coach Brennan keeps teaching, keeps training, keeps hunting. The study room encounter. The library had these small study rooms you could reserve for group projects or quiet studying. They were basically soundproof boxes with a table, chairs, and a whiteboard, perfect for when you needed to focus. I reserved one every Wednesday evening to study for AP Chemistry, from 6 to 8 p.m. when the library was open late. For the first month of senior year, it was just me in Room C, grinding through practice problems and trying not to fail. Then one Wednesday in early October, someone knocked on the door about halfway through my session. It was this girl I'd never seen before, probably a junior, with dyed silver hair and way too much eyeliner. She asked if she could share the room, said all the others were taken and she had a huge test tomorrow. I said sure. There was plenty of space, and I was kind of lonely studying by myself anyway. She introduced herself as Luna, and sat up at the other end of the table with what looked like history textbooks. We studied in silence for about 20 minutes before she started talking. She asked what I was working on, seemed genuinely interested when I explained the chemistry problems. She said she loved science, especially the dangerous parts, the reactions that could go wrong. There was something off about the way she said it, like she was talking about something else entirely. She asked if I studied here every week, if I was always alone, if anyone knew where I was. The questions seemed casual, but there was an undertone that made me uncomfortable. I lied and said my friend was coming to meet me soon. Luna smiled like she knew I was lying. She went back to her books, but I noticed she wasn't really reading. She was watching me over the top of her textbook, her eyes tracking my every movement. When I'd look at her, she'd quickly look down, but I could see her smiling. Around 7:30, she closed her books and said she needed to show me something. She pulled out her phone and showed me a video. It was me, from last week, studying in this same room, filmed from outside the door, through the little window. Then another video, from 2 weeks ago, and another. She'd been watching me for weeks. She said I looked so focused when I studied, so vulnerable, so unaware of my surroundings. She said she'd been working up the courage to finally talk to me. I stood up to leave, but she was faster, getting between me and the door. Up close, I could see her eyes were dilated huge, like she was on something. She said she'd been waiting for someone like me. Someone who studied alone, someone predictable, someone who wouldn't be missed for 2 hours. She pulled something from her bag, a small knife that she played with casually. She wasn't threatening me exactly, just showing me she had it. She said we were going to play a game. I had to answer her questions truthfully, and if she thought I was lying, there would be consequences. First question: was I a virgin? I was so shocked I just stammered, and she laughed. She said my innocence was obvious. That's partly why she chose me. Second question: had I ever thought about dying? I said no immediately, and she frowned. She said everyone thought about death, that I was lying, and she stepped closer with the knife. I was backed against the whiteboard now, nowhere to go. Third question: would anyone come looking for me if I disappeared right now? Before I could answer, someone knocked on the door. It was the librarian, Mrs. Henderson, doing her rounds before closing. Luna instantly transformed, becoming bright and cheerful, thanking me loudly for helping with her history homework. She slipped the knife back in her bag and opened the door, telling Mrs. Henderson how grateful she was for my tutoring. Then she left, but not before whispering that she'd see me next Wednesday. I packed up immediately and practically ran out of the library. When I got home, I looked for Luna in the school directory, checked social media, asked friends if they knew her. Nobody had heard of a silver-haired girl named Luna. The next day, I went to the administration to report what happened. But when they pulled the security footage from the library, it showed me studying alone the entire time. No girl ever entered my study room. The video was clear. Just me alone for 2 hours. They thought I was having a breakdown from stress, suggested I see the school counselor. But I knew what had happened was real. The videos on her phone were real. The knife was real. The next Wednesday, I didn't go to the library. But when I got home, there was a note in my backpack that hadn't been there before. Breaking routine is rude. Same time next week, or I'll come find you somewhere less public. I went back the following Wednesday, but brought my biggest friend, Mike, with me. We studied together in room C, and nothing happened. But when Mike went to the bathroom, she appeared instantly. Not knocking this time, just suddenly there, like she'd been waiting. She said bringing protection was cheating. She said the game was between us, and if I kept trying to avoid it, she'd have to visit me at home. She knew my address. She knew my schedule. She knew when my parents worked late. She knew everything. After that, I changed everything about my routine. Different study locations, different times, never patterns. But she kept finding me. Little notes in my locker. Photos of me from places I didn't know I was being watched. Once, I woke up to find my bedroom window open and a silver hair on my pillow. I convinced my parents to let me finish senior year online, said I was too stressed with college applications. They agreed, thinking I was having anxiety issues. But even at home, I could feel her watching. Sometimes I'd see a flash of silver hair outside my window. Sometimes my phone would buzz with texts from unknown numbers. You can't hide forever. I graduated without going to the ceremony. Went to college 3 states away. But last week, I reserved a study room in my college library. When I walked in, there was a silver hair on the table. Just one, placed perfectly in the center. I haven't been back to the library since. I study in my dorm now. Door locked, blinds closed. But I know she's out there, waiting, playing her game with someone else now, or maybe multiple someones, finding the students who study alone, the ones who follow predictable patterns, the ones who won't be missed for a couple hours. And when they pull the security footage, she won't be there. She never is. She's mastered the art of existing in blind spots, of being invisible to cameras but terrifyingly real to her victims. Luna, or whatever her real name is, still hunting in study rooms, still playing her games, still waiting for me to let my guard down. The Survivors Network. I found them online, in a private forum that requires verification to join. You have to prove you're a survivor, share your story, show evidence that something happened to you. There are hundreds of us, all with stories about encounters that shouldn't have been possible. Students and teachers who don't exist in any records. Rooms that appear and disappear. Invitations to places that become traps. Games with impossible rules. Authority figures who aren't quite human. We compare notes, look for patterns, try to warn others. But the pattern is always the same. Isolation, vulnerability, and adults who won't believe. The predators have evolved. They've learned to avoid cameras, forge documents, manipulate records. They target transfer students, exchange students, anyone new and alone. They pose as tutors, coaches, substitutes, other students. They create situations where their victims won't be believed. And they're spreading. What used to be isolated incidents at specific schools is now a nationwide phenomenon. We've tracked similar stories in 12 countries, always in high schools, always targeting teenagers.